Hey guys, here's the first part of October's compilation video. I hope you enjoy it. I'd like to say a quick thanks to my patrons, Shan, Jody, Sarah P, Kathleen Fenton, James Gargano, Gemma Allam, Elena Renee, Monica Levelace, Alex, and Courtney Maxwell. And now for the stories. This past Monday, my co-workers and I returned to our hotel from a day of work out in the field. Rebecca and I walked to our rooms, and as we stood outside of our rooms, I opened mine and saw someone in the bathroom. I said, "Hello?" Nobody answered. My first instinct was that it was a cleaning lady in there for some reason, and then I saw my bag with my clothes in her hands. I said to my co-worker, "There's a woman in my room." Then I asked the woman, "What are you doing with my stuff?" It gets a little fuzzy here because I can't remember everything I said and what she said, but she kept mumbling about how her key still worked, how it still worked, and that's how she got in. I was in shock, and she was obviously very flustered, having been caught mid-robbery. She dropped my bags and fumbled around with her purse and a white plastic bag. By this time, my coworker was behind me, watching all the insanity unfold. This woman was scrambling and walking towards the door. I said, "What's in the bag?" thinking it's probably my stuff, and she said, No, it's just my things. It's just my things, I'll show you." And so she did. I looked and didn't see anything of mine. And so, since I'm obviously in shock at this time, I let her leave. I went into my room, and it's been ransacked. I did a quick look around to see if anything had been taken. All of my electronics were still there. Then I went into the bathroom and saw my underwear, my bikini, and my clothes shoved into my own bags randomly. Even my passport was shoved in there. Then I looked on the counter, and I saw that she got into my medication. I'm not sure what was going through my head at that moment, other than I wanted it back, so I ran out the door to go find her. I ran to the laundry room downstairs and out to the sides of the hotel. I didn't see her. I realized I was never going to find her, so my co-worker and I went down to the lobby to tell them what happened. And then we called the police. We went back up to my room to wait, and I noticed that there was a metal bat on my bed. A little larger than one of those novelty wooden bats that you get at a baseball game, but there's also a flashlight on the end. She must have left it in a hurry. She also must have left behind a necklace that must have fallen out of her bag when she was scrambling with mine. I was mostly freaked out at this point because I thought she'd gotten away with my medication that I need. The police got there and took our statements. They looked around the room as well. One thing that I noticed were the bits of drywall in the sink. I pointed that out to the cops, but none of us really knew where it came from. We started looking at the door and the windows to see if she pried her way in. But there was nothing, so we kind of just went with the idea that she had a spare key or something, even though the hotel front desk was adamant that there's no way it could have been. The officer that came brought 2 more officers as backup because they thought the woman might still be in the vicinity. But our statements were taken. There was nothing else they could really do, so they left. I finally sat down to make some calls to people, and as I'm on the phone, I'm thinking about the drywall in the sink, and it still didn't make sense to me. So I'm on the phone and looking at the drywall and the mirror on the wall right above it. And then it hit me. I got my co-worker and asked her to help me pull the mirror off the wall. We took the mirror down, and there's a hole just big enough for a desperate person to squeeze through. I asked Brian and Rebecca if I should call the cops again, so I could let them know what I found. And my boss said there's still 2 cops in the parking lot, so I went down to tell them, and the female cop kind of rolled her eyes. But the young guy said, "I'll come check it out." They both came back up, looked in the hole, and found a pillow, blankets, cigarettes, clothes, toothbrushes. This woman had been living in the wall behind my mirror for God knows how long. She had access to me and my room at all times. One of the officers called the original officer to come back and take pictures of this. She explained to him what was going on, and all I hear over the radio is, "No way." He comes back, takes pictures, and is just as mind-blown as the rest of us. Obviously, we packed up and left immediately. What's even crazier is she'd probably been there a long time. The last time we stayed at this hotel, I would randomly smell cigarette smoke, and I assumed someone was smoking in their bathroom and it was traveling through the vents. But no, someone was smoking just on the other side of my mirror. She had access to other rooms too. The holes in the wall were from a renovation. The hotel hadn't patched it up and just covered it with mirrors. She could have been hanging out in people's rooms when they were gone. Anyway, this was insane, and I'm taking a little time off. I'm 18 and female. I just started a job at a hotel a little over a month ago as a housekeeper. The hotel is located in very rural Midwest, not a super busy hotel, except for the occasional family reunions checking in, and a few workers passing through the state. Many of the people who come through are older, 40s, 50s, and upwards. When I first started, my parents had told me to be careful because the hotel was sketchy. I never really found it to be sketchy, or the people passing through to be, until one day, about 2 weeks ago. I had just clocked in around 10:30 and headed down to the end of the hall opposite where the lobby was, so I could start on my stayovers. They are rooms where people stayed more than one night. At the end of the hall, there were 4 rooms, tucked into an almost corner, I want to say. You can't really see the doors to these rooms until you reach the end of the hallway. There's 2 rooms on one side, 2 rooms on the other. I was grabbing all the supplies I needed to do the stayover when a man, who's another stayover, came out of one of the 4 rooms and asked how to work the coffee machine. He was about 3 times the size of me, 6'3", around 300 pounds, whereas I'm 5'3", about 125. It didn't seem like a big deal or weird. I'm pretty friendly and outgoing, and I can make a little small talk. I went back to cleaning the other room and minding my business when he comes out again, only to tell me his room didn't need to be attended to. I figured so, and I was glad that another room had been checked off my list. My manager had come down the hall to strip a room that had checked out, and I turned down the hall to go strip another room when the man came out of his room yet again. I assumed he had another question about something in his room, so I turned around to speak to him. He said, "Aren't you scared to do your job?" And I replied, "No, not really, since I rarely have any interactions with guests as a housekeeper." He then went on to say that I was awfully pretty and that I needed mace or a weapon to protect myself. And so I showed him my car keys that I kept in my pocket for that exact reason. The conversation at first wasn't really off-putting, but when I realized what he was getting at, my body flooded with anxiety. He then said, "I don't think car keys are enough. You're small and could easily get snatched up." And in that moment, I went into the room my manager was in across the hall and waited for him to go back into his room before continuing my job as normal as possible. That experience really shook me up, and I sat in another room down the hall for about an hour, crying and having anxiety attacks because I thought this man would try to find me in whatever room I was in and kidnap me. I have been working for an independent hotel for just over 4 years now. We're the #1 rated hotel in our city, and proud of it. I mostly work in housekeeping, but have done some time at the front desk as well. I love my job, and have always said that my bosses are great. Now, being a housekeeper, I've seen some things. I've seen a room where someone snuck in their dog, kitten, and a chicken. We do not allow pets. I once had a room that I was cleaning as a stayover that had tripods set up around the bed, professional camera equipment cases. I even had a room once that we had to call the cops on for a raid because we found meth. They found a lot of drugs and guns in that room, but today's the first time I've ever actually felt scared to be in a guest's room. As I'm working on that room that's already been vacated, a man in the next room over catches me at my supply cart. He's said to be staying for several days and tells me, "You can go ahead and clean my room now. I'm going down for breakfast." Excellent. I love getting my stayovers done early on. It makes things easier for the people working laundry. The sooner we get dirty laundry down to them. So, I pop over into his room, opening it up and propping the door open with a stopper, like we always do. The first thing I notice is that he has around 20 prescription bottles lined up on one of the 2 beds, along with insulin and needles. I'm nosy, I'll admit, and I wanted to see what he was on. Oddly, it was only 2 different types of medication for all 20 bottles. About 2/3 were a diabetes medication, and the rest were a cholesterol medication. That's a little weird that he has so many bottles of the same medication, but whatever. I go to make the bed and see that some of the bedding has been stained. I sigh, knowing I'll have to just change all the bedding now, instead of just being able to turn down the sheets and blankets. So, I leave the room, closing it behind me to go get the linens I needed. And then, I head right back to the room. I prop the door open again and head to set the clean linens on the desk chair when I see out of the corner of my eye 2 notes sitting on the TV armoire. It wouldn't mean anything, except I caught the word "kill" scrawled on it. I dropped the linens and took a closer look. What I read on the first note made my blood run cold. "You don't have to forgive her, you just can't kill her. You are here to take money and alcohol away from you, get over having to kill her, and you can safely leave." My heart was pounding. My eyes went to the second note, which had just looked like a to-do list at first glance, but in the end made my stomach churn. Spray and wash, apply for Medicare, insubordination, the soul is healed by being with children, bank card follow-up, inheritance, savings, Kauai Pop 10,500, map Montana, there will be a day of reckoning. Did you tell Mom what I said? How did Bev get my address? It was too much. I quickly snapped photos of them on my phone so I could show my boss why I would not clean his room. I left the room quickly, closing it behind me. As the door closes, I turn and I see the man just 10 feet away from me, coming back to his room. My heart is in my throat, but I manage to smile and tell him, "I need more supplies. I'll be back in your room in a bit." I take off straight for the elevator, having noticed our maintenance man waiting for the slow transport. In a hushed tone, I tell him what I found, and he sees I'm shaken. Not a normal state for me. He rides down with me, and I go straight to my boss and tell her that for the first time in all these years, I am not comfortable being in a guest's room. I show her the pictures, and her face is still and pale. She goes to the front desk and asks our general manager for a minute of her time. She brings her into the office to show her. She agreed this was not a safe situation. She took the maintenance man with her to go inform the man that he had 1 hour to get his belongings and leave the hotel, and he was not welcomed back. I spent a few minutes in the laundry room trying to calm down. Then my boss went back up with me to the floor until the man was officially out of the hotel. I don't know who Bev is. I don't know who the woman is that he didn't feel the need to forgive. I'm a female from northern Norway. When I was younger, I used to do speed skating, which is a form of ice skating where you practice to become as fast as possible. I had 2 coaches. They are both pretty old. There are usually competitions at different locations, where you get to compete with someone else. I had been doing ice skating for about a year at the time, and we had been traveling a lot throughout the northern parts of Norway, and we'd actually traveled to Russia as well for a competition. We once traveled to a small peninsula, which is located in the middle of nowhere. This little town contained about 2,000 people and had one single hotel. It took about 5 hours to drive to this little town from my hometown. When we finally arrived, we settled into the hotel we had booked. For some reason, they had booked 2 rooms, one for them and one for me. At the time, all the others who used to practice ice skating with me had quit, or was not allowed to travel so far. At first, having a hotel room for 2 for myself felt great. I had privacy and free time to do whatever I wanted. While I was at competition and waiting for my turn to compete, I made friends with a girl who we'll call Marie. Marie was sweet and kind, and she made the weekend I was spending in that town a little bit more fun. We were both the same age. We met later on the same day I met her and hung out at her school where there was an arrangement. I figured it would be a good idea to bring her to the hotel and hang out. Honestly, it was a great idea. We watched a movie and ate some snacks and had fun. Then at some point, it was time for her to leave. It was pretty late, around midnight when she left. I was a very decent kid, so I followed her downstairs to the lobby to say goodbye. I was also intending on buying a bottle of soda while downstairs. When she had left, I went to buy a soda at the counter that was close to the exit. There was a man standing behind the counter. He had an accent, so I figured he had moved to Norway from another country recently. He seemed very interested in me and asked what I was doing in the lobby at such a late time. I told him I wanted to get a soda and asked for the price per bottle as there was no price tag near. He told me that one bottle is 40 Norwegian krona, which is about $5. I decided that I would not pay that much for a small bottle of soda and said that I would be heading upstairs. The guy instantly starts begging me to stay downstairs and talk to him. This scared me a little, but I felt as if I had to stay. He asked me a lot of questions. He asked me what my name is, where I was from, if my parents were here, who I am with, that kind of thing. I answered honestly to all of those, even though I felt threatened and unsafe. I knew not to trust strangers, but I've always had a thing for being nice to everyone. I eventually said I was tired and will go upstairs to catch some sleep. He tried to make me stay longer, but I decided to leave anyway. A few moments later, before I had gone to sleep, I heard someone knocking on my door. I thought to myself that it might just be one of my coaches who may have needed something from me. So I went to open the door. It was neither of them. It was the guy from before. He was holding a lighter and in a very broken accent said that he was looking for someone who lost a lighter. I said it's not my lighter and was about to shut the door when he put his foot between the door and the wall. He asked to come in. I was scared as hell and started pushing on the door. I remember very little about this part, but I can make out that I somehow managed to close the door and lock it. I immediately made a call to my mother, who called my coaches to tell them about the incident. I never saw him again after that. When we got home, my mother made a call to the hotel manager and complained about the incident. The manager said he will not charge the guy for what he did, and that he will not face any consequences, even though my mom kept telling him what the guy's intentions likely were. I know it sounds ridiculous, but the guy probably still works there to this day. I'm so confused about the whole incident, and so incredibly happy that whatever I did stopped him from getting in and going through with his terrible intentions. I want to preface this story by stating that I've had my fair share of encounters with creepy men. This situation, however, scared the life out of me. It's the first time that I genuinely felt like my life was in danger. My husband and I had to drive 17 hours last week to North Carolina for a wedding. It was an exhausting week, and we basically spent the entire time rushing from one family gathering to another. We were staying in a motel for the time we were there. We had already been staying at this motel for a few days by the time the day of the actual wedding rolled around. The day of the wedding was hectic. We were rushing around, trying to get ready to leave for the venue. My husband got ready before me, so he could do some last-minute things before we had to leave. That left me alone in our motel room to get ready before he returned. It was brutally hot outside, and I decided to do my hair and makeup in just my underwear, so I wouldn't be sweating in my nice dress the whole time. The way this motel was laid out, the sink and mirror were in the general open area of the room, with a toilet and shower in another room. So anyone walking by our room window could see me standing at the mirror. However, I did have the curtains closed, but these curtains were a little bit sheer, so you could technically see the shadow of someone walking by on the outside, or possibly see the silhouette of me inside the room. I was curling my hair in the mirror when I noticed the silhouette of a man walking by my room window. As he's passing my window, I see him stop and start trying to look into my window. At first, I thought it was my husband trying to see if I was ready, so I paid no mind to it. But the longer the guy stood there, bobbing his head around trying to get a better look through the window, I began to realize it was not my husband. Now I'm starting to get a little freaked out. Before I could do anything though, I watch as this guy starts to go for my room door. My utter shock and horror came when he was actually able to open the door and then walk inside. Before my husband left, he forgot to pull the door shut all the way, till it clicked into its lock. So now, I am face to face with this man, in my underwear no less. He's at least 6 foot tall and standing in my room. I thought to myself, this is it. He's going to attack you. That's a very scary realization to have. I also thought to myself, I'm gonna have to burn his eye sockets out with his curling iron if I want to survive. For a few seconds, he just stood there staring at me, like I was a piece of meat and he was starving, ready to pounce on me like prey. He then began to smile the most evil-looking, toothy grin I've ever seen, and started to mumble something under his breath. I couldn't make out what he was saying completely, but I did make out the words, "Pretty lady," and "come here." I don't know if it was a fight or flight response, but I suddenly got pissed. I charged towards him, ready to strike him with my hot curling iron. I screamed as loud as I could, "Get out of here." It must have startled him because he jumped back, out onto the balcony of the motel. I saw this as my chance and I ran for the door. I luckily was able to get to the door and slam it shut, right before he was able to make his second attempt at entering inside. I immediately collapsed on the floor, sobbing. I was too scared to move from that spot until my husband came back about 15 minutes later. I told him the whole thing and he freaked out. He initially wanted to find the guy so he could beat the shit out of him, but I refused to let him leave my side. He must have apologized 1,000 times during the rest of our trip for not making sure the door was locked before leaving. But I told him that the day was so rushed, I could see how it happened. We went to the motel management and told them the whole story. The police were obviously called, and I gave them the description of the guy so they could see if it was someone who was staying in the motel. After going around to the few motel occupants, they said no one matched his description, and they concluded he wasn't staying there. Obviously, we were late to the wedding that day. The whole experience just ruined what should have been a happy time. We planned on staying another day before our long drive home, but we both just wanted out of there as soon as possible. We skipped most of the reception, went back to the motel, packed up and left. I'm usually always so vigilant with locking my doors, especially when I'm home alone. It just goes to show you, all it takes is that one time you forget to check your locks, and that certain unwanted guest is inviting themselves in. This happened to me about 2.5 years ago. It was October, almost Halloween. My husband and I were out seeing one of our favorite bands with another couple. Huge, well-known metropolitan area. We were completely wasted, drinking screwdrivers and shots of Jack Fire. Our friend we were with went to go refill our drinks, and when he came back, he had a girl with him, who looked to be around our age. In reality, she could have been anywhere from 18 to 28. He tells us that the girl had lost her dad, and she wants us to help her find him. We were so drunk and just having an awesome time, so we told her, "We can't really help you look for your dad, but you can stand here with us until you find him, or he finds you, or whatever." No big deal at this point. So this girl stands with me the whole time. We are holding on to each other and dancing, and we both know every word to every song, and it was actually just an amazing time. So fast forward a couple of songs. This is when things start getting weird. She starts begging me to come back to her hotel with her and her dad. She's saying stuff like, "I promise it's not weird. It's not going to be creepy. I swear we're not the cops." And just overall weird shit like that. She would not shut up about this. She wanted me to come back with her and her dad so bad. I can't really remember everything she said, because like I said, I was inebriated. But what I'll never forget is the most creepy, weird feeling that washed over me when she was saying all this to me. My husband wasn't paying much attention, so he didn't hear what she was saying. For some unknown reason, the friend that we came in with, who was married to the guy that brought this crazy girl to us in the first place, turned around and starts cussing the shit out of this crazy girl. I don't remember what she was saying, but it was along the lines of, "You need to piss off." And at that moment, I turned to my husband and said, "This bitch is creeping me out. Let's lose her." And so we ran away to the lobby area. I was so scared she was going to find us or track us down or something. I've always just got the most weird feeling when I think about that night. That girl wanted something from me, but I don't know what it was. It could have been she was just having a good time with me and wanted it to continue after the show. Her being there with her dad, though, is what made it so weird for me for some reason. I got the vibe that they could have been human traffickers, or an occult, or something sinister. The fact that I was so drunk, and my spidey senses still went off like they did, that's why I can't shake the feeling I could have been in some kind of creepy danger that night. I'm a hunter. I like to hunt wild boar, specifically. Though I have been deer hunting, and have been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving. But I mostly hunt boar. For those of you that don't know, boar are a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife make it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. I've been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that cost twice as much as the rifle I was mounting it on was worth it. But I did it. I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy-to-find spots that I could set up that overlooked a large, easy-to-navigate clearing. The night started uneventful, mostly me tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season. And, like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. I moved to another spot I'd seen days earlier that probably wasn't much better than the first, but it gave me something to do, and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. This spot doesn't have much animal activity at all. No rabbit or owls. The deer that I had seen were hundreds of yards from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night, but lively in the day? I'd set up around 10 p.m., and it was about 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up. Maybe setting up a target before I left. I heard a crunch come from the direction I came from before. I panned my scope over and saw the silhouette of a small bear. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision, it's a thermal scope, kind of like a black and white version of what you see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little. I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear, it was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that the game warden? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming up the road from where I was perched. And where could he have walked from? I was 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I noticed he was naked. No shoes, pants, or anything. I remember being disturbed by his movements, like a squirrel or something, twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree. Was that my tree, the one I'd been leaning against earlier? The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Then, he did something I still have nightmares about to this day. He squatted down and placed his hands in the dirt between his feet and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it. A voice coming from that direction. A female voice. Help, I'm lost. There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? Help, please, I can't walk, the voice called out. That's when I called bullshit. Not only could he walk, when I first saw him, he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person. So good, I mistook him for a bear. That's a trap. This guy's trying to lure me in with his damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left a hat and a sitting pad, but I didn't give a shit in that moment. I took my eyes off him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but his face was staring in my direction. And I swear I saw a smile. How the hell had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He was easily 150 yards away. Fuck off, I screamed in that direction. He stood upright, and it hit me how tall and skinny he was. He was easily 6 feet, and very lean. He took a couple of long strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round, sailing above his head, into the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me. What would I tell the cops? He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. "The next one will mess you up. Go away." He stayed on all fours, and this time, my sights were on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass, like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling, and I knew my voice cracked a bit on that last warning. I was terrified. The standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he bolted left towards the tree line, opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I couldn't keep him in my scope as he was moving so fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another round sailing high in his direction. I racked off another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't even bother looking for it. It wasn't far from my truck, and I wanted to get out of there. I could hear him in the distance, yelling in this weird sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck breathless. I tossed my gear in the cab, but kept the rifle on the passenger seat and sped off. For the longest time, I told that story from having the perspective of spotting some deranged man living off the land like a caveman. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night, alone. Never received an update. It wasn't until I told this story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about wendigos, rakes, and skinwalkers. My story scared the piss out of him because the spot we were camping in was technically the same forest I'd seen the bastard, just 50 miles east of it. He was so spooked, his mom had to take him home. She was really pissed. I've gone down the rabbit hole on these scary stories. I'm not saying what I saw definitely was a wendigo or a skinwalker. I'm saying that if such a thing exists, I may have dodged quite the bullet that night. To better paint the picture, here is a description of myself at the time of this incident. 5'5", 26-year-old woman, medium-length bleach blonde hair, curvy 175 pounds, wearing black high-waisted tights and a pink crop top. 3 years ago, I was walking home late at night from my friend's house. It was dark, and at the time, I lived in a rough part of a large city. I've had many sketchy situations that I've gotten myself out of, so I guess I sort of felt invincible, like nothing truly scary could happen to me. When I walk alone, I always stay very alert and aware of my surroundings, for my own safety, just in case. About halfway home, and roughly 10 minutes to my apartment, I noticed a van tailing me. I was used to this, since in my city, it is very common for a young woman in a rough area to get propositioned for sex. It's embarrassing how desensitized I was to this. I did my usual and crossed the road so that I would be walking beside the traffic heading in the opposite direction. I wasn't scared, just annoyed. The van then turned down a side street, then back onto the road I was on, and pulled up next to me. At this point, I still wasn't scared. Again, this has happened so many times, and it never mattered if I was wearing something that showed more skin, or if I was wearing a winter coat zipped from just below my chin, all the way down to my ankles. That area is notorious for that type of activity. I decided to be firm and told the person sternly, I'm not interested. I noticed there were 2 men in the van. They looked almost identical, and may have been twins or brothers, dark eyes, and short dark hair. The van didn't move. I was super annoyed and crossed the road again to get away. At this point, I figured this would be enough for them to stop following me. It wasn't. They kept circling back every time I crossed the road. I've never had to put that much effort into getting a horny pervert to leave me alone, so this is when I started feeling unsafe. They went past me at the speed the traffic was flowing in, and I yelled for them to fuck off. I thought it finally worked. It had been 3 minutes and I hadn't seen the van, so I thought I was in the clear. Just in case, I pulled my phone out and was getting ready to call my sister that I lived with. Just then, the van pulled up to me very quickly, and before I could even blink, one of the men jumped out of the van, opened the back door, and approached me quickly in an aggressive manner, as if he was about to scoop me up and throw me into the vehicle. The traffic in that area is very inconsistent. It was dead, and I imagine that's what they were waiting for. Just as the man was about to place his hands on me, I tilted my phone and said, "You're being filmed in my live video chat. I gave my friends your license plate number, and the police have been notified." I was so scared, but I didn't let that show. I stayed as calm as I could. The man paused like he was considering if I was bluffing or telling the truth. So I tilted the phone more, as if to give the fake audience a better look at him. He then jumped into the van, and they sped off. I have never been the same since that night. I am afraid of walking alone now, even in the daytime. Stay safe out there. 2 creeps in the van. I hope karma finds you both soon. A few years ago, I was working as a healthcare assistant at a hospital, and I had recently moved out of my dad's home. I started renting a small detached home in the countryside. I had one neighbor on this street, a man in his late 30s, who I will call Jake. He was single and lived alone. My first encounter with Jake was when I was moving in. My dad couldn't accompany me on my first day of moving in due to his work schedule, so I was unpacking by myself. Jake walked up to me, introduced himself, and offered to help me with moving in my heavy items. I'm a very small woman, so I appreciated the help. My first impressions were that he was very kind, open, and polite. He chatted to me about his job, told me that he liked to play instruments and write in his spare time. We bonded over both loving the band Tool, and we both enjoyed playing the bass. The next day, I brought him some beer as a thank you. He wasn't in, however, so I left it by his front door and included a thank you note for all the previous help the day prior. Over the next few weeks, as I settled in, Jake would pop by. We'd chat about music, discuss shared hobbies, drink beer, and occasionally even watch movies together. I was new to the area and didn't have many friends yet, so he helped provide me some social interaction outside of my job. As you can already tell, things didn't stay so good. I got home one evening to see a basket full of flowers on my doorstep. It included a card which read that it was from Jake, and he wanted to speak with me when I had time. I walked inside with the basket. I didn't even get a chance to put it down before I heard knocking at my door. It was around 11 p.m., and I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the window next to the door to see Jake waving at me. I opened the door, and that's the first time I can recall when I started to feel uneasy around him. He asked if I saw the basket and if I liked it. He asked to come in, but I said something along the lines of how tired I was after work, and that we should speak tomorrow. He didn't say anything for a few seconds before he asked if I would want to grab a coffee with him before work tomorrow. I said sure and closed the door. That next morning, we grabbed a coffee at Costa that was close to the hospital I worked at. He seemed very excited and giddy. Soon after, he asked me to be his girlfriend. I had to decline, as we'd only known each other for a few weeks, and well, he was significantly older than me. He suddenly dropped his cheery demeanor, as if he had become someone else in a matter of seconds. he grabbed his things and left, only saying that he has to go to work. I went to work too, and tried not to think much of it. I had to work overtime that night, and started heading home at around midnight. When I pulled up to my home, I saw Jake sitting on my doorstep. I really didn't want to get out of my car, but I did, and walked up to him. He started off politely, asking if I had thought over his proposal. I said no, that I'm sorry, but I'm not interested. Once again, as if a switch had flipped, he went off on me, calling me spoiled and ungrateful. I was scared at that point, and asked him to leave. He wouldn't. I managed to get to my car with him following me, and showed him through the window that I'm calling the police. He swore at me and left. I didn't call the police that night. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, thinking he was just frustrated. One of my biggest regrets is not calling them. The next morning, I found wildflowers that looked like they were picked from a garden at my front door, as well as a post-it with the word "sorry" and a sad face drawn on it. At work that day, I was called by the nurse in charge, who took me aside, saying my boyfriend was here to see me, as it's urgent. She also told me to tell my boyfriend that he shouldn't come to see me at work again, especially since I wasn't on a break, as it's unprofessional. It was Jake. He wanted to ask me if I'd gotten his flowers and message. I went off on him, saying things along the lines of, "How dare he come to my work, get me in trouble no less, and pose as my boyfriend." All of this took place in the canteen. He didn't say anything, didn't apologize. I told him to knock it off, and I left. Things only got worse from there. He would often wait for me when I got home, try to bribe me with gifts, more flowers. He even went as far as to get me a new guitar. I accepted nothing, and always left everything where he put them. I eventually broke down to my dad, who asked if I wanted him to speak to Jake. I said no. He offered for me to move back with him, but I had too much pride and declined. My dad was really worried about me. One day, everything came to a halt. When I came home to my front door, ajar, though not broken. My front room looked absolutely ransacked. I ran to my car and called the police. Nothing was missing, absolutely nothing, but my front room, kitchen, and bedroom were all rummaged through. I told the police I had an inkling it was Jake, who they ended up questioning, but his friend vouched for him and said that they were together that evening. So it couldn't have been Jake. I still don't believe that. I tried to tell the police everything that has happened with Jake and how I was starting to feel very unsafe. However, I had no proof but the notes he had left me, which weren't threatening, so since there was no threat to life or well-being, they literally couldn't do anything. My dad helped me clean everything up, and I had my locks changed. Jake actually left me alone for a little while after that. I started to look for new places to live around that time. Then one evening, I had come home, eaten some food, showered, and went to bed, only to be awoken, I'm not sure when, to somebody standing in my doorway. I didn't move. I remember originally thinking that I was having a sleep paralysis episode, but after moving my fingers, I realized I was fully awake, with a dark figure clearly standing in my doorway. My phone was under my pillow, so I rolled over to my side, pretending to still be asleep, and I just waited. With my hand under my pillow, on my phone, there was no way I could call the police without alerting the person in my doorway. Eventually, I could hear the footsteps fade, and then I called the police, only telling them my address and that someone just broke into my home, and I think they're still there. I got out of bed, grabbed the keys on my nightstand, and left the house by means of the window. I bolted it to my car. I had on a tank top and shorts. I didn't even have shoes on, which made driving terrible. I saw him when I was pulling out, standing in the kitchen, through the window. It was Jake. I had a small essential oil diffuser next to the window that shined enough light to be able to tell who the figure was. I drove as I spoke to the policeman. I remember just completely detaching from reality. At least that's what it felt like. I drove to my dad's house. After looking over my house, the police drove to my dad's home where I was. I told him everything about Jake, how he's been following me, coming to my work, waiting for me when I got home, and now I was 100% sure he broke into my home and was planning to do God knows what. I was told that they found my front door locked when they got there and went to knock on Jake's door. He answered and looked as if he had just woken up. They asked him some questions and left him alone. It is so unimaginably hard to prove that you're being stalked in the UK. I managed to get a restraining order on the grounds of harassment, with proof that he'd come to my workplace posing as my boyfriend and a co-worker who could support me in this, as she overheard our conversation where I asked him to stop following me. I had also saved some messages he had sent me where I asked how he had got my number and told him to stop contacting me. But he had went on to send some vaguely threatening messages along the lines of, "I'll be waiting when you come home today," which, along with the workplace incident, as well as the fact I had mentioned Jake to the police when my house was broken into, managed to get my restraining order. I went back to that house once with my dad and his friend so I could gather all of my things. I did not see Jake that time, or ever again for that matter. I had to transfer workplaces back to my original workplace as I moved back in with my dad. I'm now moved away and live alone again, trying to put the past behind me. But this type of thing definitely messed with me a little. I had to get some therapy and found it difficult to develop friendships, especially romantic relationships. He somewhat ruined that for me. I've not made any new friends since, never had a boyfriend either. I find it very hard to trust people outside of work colleagues and family. Austin, Texas. This happened last night at about 12:15. I was in my bed when I heard frantic knocking. I walked out of my bedroom while the knocking continued again and heard a woman saying, "Please help me," along with crying, but it was faint. I looked out the peephole to see no one there and no other doors were being knocked on, just mine. Which is odd by itself, but I am also on the 3rd floor. Why would someone walk all the way up here to my apartment in distress? I think it was a recording, because if someone really needed help, they would be banging on everyone's door. I called the police immediately, and the dispatcher told me not to open the door, and if I had a weapon. I have heard of this tactic before, while slightly different, with it being a recording of a baby crying. It's just insane when thinking about the statistics of stranger abductions and how they usually result in murder. Also, it's so sick to try and prey on people's empathy. Police drove by. I saw them using their spotlight to look through the complex, but as of now, I have no idea if anyone was found or by chance someone was hurt, if they found her. I've barely slept with all the possibilities of how this person found me, where they saw me, when they followed me, or if they live in this complex. I am 4'10", live alone, and I don't know many people in the area. No family that are close either. Have they been watching me and know all of this? It's just making me go crazy. I have talked with management to let them know what was going on. As of right now, no one else has reported to them anything similar. I'm going to contact the police again for an update. I was redirected to another police department, but they weren't the ones who responded to the call. I know it takes some time for reports to be filed, so I am trying to be patient. As far as it being a prank, absolutely, it could be, but I would be more inclined to believe it if it happened to other women in the apartment. Maybe it has, but they haven't said anything. One side of the coin, it's a very cruel prank that I shouldn't worry about. And on the other side is that someone has been watching me and had something sinister in mind. It is horrifying to think someone would pull an elaborate prank like this, or even real-world things that happen that we think would never happen to us, with guns and self-defense classes. I will be getting both of these, but they take time and lots of money. I don't want to just get a cheap gun and no training. That won't help much. It will be something I will invest my time and money into, but for the short security, I can only get a doorbell camera and stay updated with the police department. And I feel much safer knowing if they come back, I at least have a recording from my doorbell camera. I know I need to talk to my neighbors, but right now, I am exhausted from no sleep and still spooked, so I will do it tomorrow. I hope the police report will be filed tomorrow, and I can finally talk to a deputy about this. This is a true story. God is my witness. I'm not making it up. I'm 57 years old now. This is a memory that never goes away, never fades. In 1986, I stopped at Topeka, Kansas, on my way back from working in Yellowstone National Park for the summer. My friend had also just graduated from high school a few years before, and had moved to Topeka with his parents. I stayed about a week. His parents invited me to stay an extra day for their family reunion before I headed back home. We drove way out into the country for their family reunion in his old beater car and spent all day with his extended family. In the late afternoon, we made our way back to Topeka in his old beater car with a broken gas gauge. We ran out of gas. He said we were probably 6 to 7 miles from the nearest gas station, pre-cell phone era, remember. We were trying to figure out what to do when suddenly a van with no windows pulls over and asks us if we need help. When you're young, you think these things just miraculously happen for you. When you're older, you know better. We tell him we ran out of gas. A friendly enough man offers to take us to the nearest gas station. We get into the van and discover there are a total of 3 men in the vehicle. There are no seats in the back, and we're just sitting on the floor of what appears to be a work-type, beat-up, older model white van when we clearly hear the men discussing doing us harm. The driver says he knows a good place to go. The other man in the passenger seat, eyeing me, agrees that he's in and nods in approval. Only one man, sitting nearest us, says he's not in and doesn't want to be involved in this at all. That he's got a baby now, and he's not cool with this, that he doesn't want any part of it. The driver and passenger seat rider said something under their breaths I couldn't hear. There was an angry silence while the driver thought this over. In my mind, I prayed one word: help. My mind felt like I was stuttering thoughts. Part of me was in denial, another part is shock. Fear hadn't even set in yet, just like a jolt to the system of an unreal horror happening to someone else. Because an hour ago, I was completely safe, without a care in the world, and now, the absurd idea of someone murdering me and leaving us somewhere where nobody would find us, those things were flipping through my mind. Have you ever been to Kansas? Lots of lonely, godforsaken, desolate roads to nowhere. If at this point the third guy changed his mind, or simply said, just let him out first, I wouldn't be sharing this with you right now. They stopped talking to each other. They had never spoken to us at all, from the moment we entered the van. My friend and I didn't speak to each other We barely looked at each other. We were afraid. I could hear the rattle of the trap van's noises and the tires on the road. I saw my friend flexing, as if to warn he would fight to defend himself, while they were discussing where to take us. Everything felt surreal, but the guy in the back, that guy, said no. And just like that, the driver pulled over and the guy in the back opened up the door and let us out. And it was over. The air smelled somehow fragile and tainted. The ground looked different, like I couldn't quite trust it. My friend looked as shaken up as I felt. We had survived a close encounter with shark-like predators, the darkest evil. I looked at the gas station in the late afternoon waning sunset. Just before dark, the gas station had transformed itself into a shining beacon of light, a safe haven of shelter and safety. And I knew once we got into that gas station, there's no way I would walk back to the car. The white van with no windows pulling away from us felt surreal, like looking at it might give it the power to suck us up in its vacuum of ill intent. Today, I can still see that van pulling away, a sort of mirage from a nightmare that had crossed over into my waking reality. For context, we are both females, and at the time I was 12 or 13, and my cousin was 16 or 17. It was a hot, humid summer day, and my aunt was having a small get-together at her house. My family went over in the afternoon. After a few hours, there was a lull in the action, and my cousin and I wanted to go for a walk and enjoy the air as it was getting a bit cooler. We had no particular route in mind when we set off, but after about a mile, my cousin suggested we continue on to our other aunt's apartment, which was a neighborhood over, so we could check in on her. The idea didn't sit well with me. I was, and still am, a very cautious person, but she was older than me and assured me it would be fine. We wanted to keep walking anyway, so why not, right? We walked for so long that the sun began setting as we crossed over a bridge that traversed a creek and brought us into a more urban neighborhood in which my aunt lived. We stopped to take a short break, admiring the water while we chatted. I remember seeing the orange and red deepen in the sky, and the shadows of the trees along the bank lengthened and gently swayed. At this point, I was getting a bit tired, and I was happy when my cousin said we only had a few more blocks to go. We kept on a sidewalk that ran the length of the right side of a very wide road. As we kept going, we noticed on the left side of the road that there was a smaller road, one that branched off at about a 30-degree angle. Given the fading light, we could also make out the figure of a large-framed person walking in our direction. He was about 1,000 feet away when he saw us and roared at the top of his lungs, "Hey, hey!" He flailed his arms to get our attention. Then he pointed and hollered, "You!" My cousin and I were taken aback. I remember thinking, why would he scream like that, even if he knew us? The manner and tone of his yell was unsettling. It was about 5 seconds before our mix of surprise and concern quickly turned to pure fear as this man took off in an all-out sprint towards us. Now, 1,000 feet seemed decently far away, but he was coming at us like Usain Bolt. The distance was closing fast. Fortunately, my cousin snapped into flight mode, and we took off running as fast as we've ever ran in our lives. With all the adrenaline pumping through me, I barely felt my feet hit the ground with each spring forward. Even so, I was just barely keeping up with my cousin. So she grabbed my wrist and held it firmly as we ran, keeping me alongside her. The guy shouted once again as he chased us, and my cousin glanced back. I'll never forget the look of terror on her face. She must have had an extra rush of adrenaline because she burst forward even faster, my wrist in hand. We were flying. As we closed in on my aunt's place, I could hear the man's footsteps getting louder and louder. I could tell from the sound that he wasn't directly behind us, but I prayed we'd manage to keep enough distance to turn right at the next block to get to my aunt's yard unscathed. Thankfully, the sun was almost fully set, and it was almost even darker than before, so I knew it would be harder to see where we went. Once we turned off the main road, within seconds, we were rounding the corner and slowing down to open my aunt's gate. She lived in a basement apartment on a corner lot, which had a yard that was fenced in all around by 6-foot-tall wooden panels. As my cousin went through the gate and ran into the yard first, I was the one to close it. We had been going so fast and had so much adrenaline, my first impulse was to slam it and run down the steps to the apartment door. But my instinct told me that the noise might alert him to where we were. So I closed the gate as quietly and quickly as possible. I looked for a lock, but there was none. I ran to where my cousin was, on the steps leading down to the door. We stood on the steps with our eyes just above ground level, trying to keep as quiet as possible. A few seconds later, I heard that man's footsteps and saw him run to the cross street that flanked my aunt's yard. He stopped for a moment to look around, breathing hard and mumbling expletives. I held my breath as I saw his eyes and the top of his head swivel around, wildly, searching for any sign of us. In a flash, he suddenly took off down the street past the yard, and I breathed a sigh of relief. We knew we had to get indoors now. We knocked on the door, being careful not to bang and draw attention, but there was no answer. No one was home. My cousin began looking for a spare key that she may have hidden, while I tried to get the small window by the door open. No luck. At this point, we were trying not to panic, but it started to dawn on us the danger we were in, and the fact that we didn't have any good options for safety, getting inside or back home. It was dark now. We were both tired and knew we couldn't outrun him again if he doubled back and saw us. We didn't want to be sitting ducks, especially since the gate didn't have a lock, and trying to run back was too risky given how far it was. Fortunately, my prayers were answered some minutes later when the neighbor's backyard light turned on and we heard barking. A couple was letting their small dogs out, and they stood on their deck talking while the dogs ran around. My cousin and I crept over to the fence and could see through a few cracks in between the panels. We managed to get their attention and explain what just happened. They were definitely surprised, but were also very nice and understanding. They must have heard the panic and desperation in our voices because they took us seriously. They offered to drive us home, and we gratefully accepted. As they drove us back to my aunt's house, I remember being so glad that they went outside when they did. For a time, I worked at a rural hospital in Mississippi, and I would often drive between my home state of Texas and Mississippi in the afternoon or evening. I've seen lots of weird and wacky things, but the creepiness of the bayou backroads is unmatched. I've had naked men in ragged-out pickups waiting on the side of the road at night, trying to follow me as I passed, and other assorted, stereotypical rural fuckery. But the weirdest one wasn't stereotypical at all. While traveling down the I-10 one afternoon, I noticed a Prius pacing me in my blind spot and blocking me in my lane. I gave them a moment to pass, and when they didn't, I began slowing down. They matched my speed, This continues for several miles, and my go-ahead wave has been ignored. So finally, I'm tired of going well under the speed limit, so I slow down and then punch it, taking advantage of my better acceleration to make a path ahead of them. And I shoot off at about 95 miles per hour. They're speeding up now too. They stay within sight of me for the next 25 miles or so, matching my speed from 55 behind a slow truck to almost 100. They won't pass, they won't go away. I finagle traffic such that I exit the freeway without them being able to follow and pull off to get some gas. I do my thing and rejoin the freeway, only to pass them sitting on the shoulder a short ways up, as if they're waiting for me. Well, now I'm properly spooked, so I made sure to take note of their license plate and continue my journey. I didn't see them again for a few miles, but here they come again, tailgating me. They stay within sight of me for the next 45 minutes or so, matching my speed and lane selection. At this point, I've had enough, so I again finagle traffic and force them beside me. The middle-aged couple inside the car are staring at me with the most intense look of hatred I've ever seen. I'm not ashamed to admit that my blood ran cold when I saw the look of pure rage in their faces. I give a "what did I do" sort of shrug gesture, and the male passenger gives a sarcastic, slightly crazed-looking smile and does a "you better think" gesture at his head, followed by a universal signal for cutting a throat. The female driver is all over the road as she stares over at me, forcing me over partially onto the shoulder. Incensed and obviously nervous, I give him the finger and pin the throttle. I take off at go directly to jail speeds. I didn't stop until the car faded into the distance, and then I took an alternative route through some crazy curvy country roads and made sure I disappeared. I am reasonably certain that I didn't cut them off prior to this incident, and I didn't recognize them at all. I have no idea what their problem with me was, but I'm kinda glad I didn't give them a chance to tell me. This happened in the early 2000s, and I was probably in the first grade. This was in Bulgaria. I am from a mid-sized town, not too small and not too big. The perfect one for raising your children. Crime is pretty much unheard of. You can sleep outside on a bench and nothing would happen to you. One weekend, some family friends from a nearby town came to visit my town, and my parents and I decided to go to the park with them. Now, it is important to say that all the parks in my town are located right on the edge of this town. At some point, the park becomes a forest. Since it isn't a very big town, we don't have central parks. The park that we had gone to runs along a river, and it's a long, narrow pathway. And on one side, there is the river, and on the other, there is a thick forest with cliffs. At the time, I didn't like the park so much because it was a very long walk. So, like most kids, I got bored of walking with my parents and the other family, since they were talking grown-up stuff, and I didn't really want to listen to them. I decided to run off ahead, and by ahead, I mean out of sight from my parents. Keep in mind that there is no other pathway in the park. It was a fairly straightforward path, with slight curves due to the river, and I had gone pretty far ahead. Usually, in this park, there are always people, and it's quite crowded on the weekends. But since it was summer, most people were on family vacations, and it was surprisingly empty. I couldn't see anyone in a straight line in either way. At that point, I started hearing something in the forest, which was pretty loud. And don't forget that on the other side was the river, which was also loud. I stopped and started staring in the forest. I saw how the bushes were moving. Whatever it was coming in my direction. I was pretty clueless to what was happening until I saw a man with long hair, a band across his forehead, dressed like a hunter, with an air rifle on his back, running full speed towards me. There was no freezing moment. I just started running in the opposite direction and screaming my lungs out for my parents, hoping that they could hear me. But because of the river, I doubt that anyone could hear me from 100 meters away. I remember looking backward and seeing him chase me. I was thinking, okay, maybe this is the end for me. I guess it's over. I was imagining how he would catch me and drag me into the forest, and then I would never see my family or friends ever again. It felt like an eternity, but I finally saw my parents and our friends. My whole face was red. I was crying and snotting like crazy, barely breathing. The hunter also stopped running after he saw my parents and the others. I remember my parents started screaming at him, shouting what the hell was he doing. I don't remember exactly what he said. I was just relieved that it was over. But what I do remember was him shaking his head, saying something along the lines of, "I did nothing wrong. I was only trying to help him." The weirdest part was that there was no game in that park. It is a park after all, and the forest that he was hiding in was at maximum 50 meters in width before the cliffs begin. So it's practically impossible to have any game there, since there are always people walking there. You can see wild foxes, but that's about it. You need to go beyond the park, out in the forest, to hunt game. It is also highly illegal to carry a firearm out in public. We have very strict laws on firearms. Only police and military personnel are allowed to carry firearms. I don't know anyone who owns a gun. Civilians are allowed to register, but that's only air guns for hunting. No hardcore weapons allowed, and of course, you're not allowed to carry them in a park where there are people. Only in regulated zones for hunting, away from populated areas. You would never see hunters like that unless you go to these zones, or you're in a village, which is still rare. No, we didn't report it afterwards. Too much of a hassle. This was the first and last time something like that happened to me, thankfully, and I haven't developed any fears from that place. Even now, when I go back to my town, I go running in that park after midnight, and I am perfectly fine. This story happened around 2017. I was 18 or so and lived in a dorm in Kiev. It was built at the stupidest place possible for a student's dormitory, in a quiet neighborhood between regular 9th-floor houses with strollers and old ladies sitting on benches. This was kind of uncomfortable, and logistics were awful, especially at night, with the nearest subway station being a 30-minute walk. So, long story short, I had my final second-year exams coming, and I was studying non-stop with all-nighters and a fridge full of Red Bull. During one of these nights, I felt this unbearable craving for Dutch stroopwafels. I guess my brain was finally going crazy without sugar and enough sleep. By the time I was really tired of studying and desperate for a walk, my roommates were sleeping and my best friend was deep in her books, also studying. So, I went out to get some waffles, alone, at 1:30 a.m. Yeah, I know. It wasn't something unusual. We went out a lot, even in the middle of the night. It's not like we lived in the most dangerous Kiev neighborhood, so I grabbed my wallet and cigarette case and went out. For a bit more detail, we had some kind of curfew in our dorm. After midnight, doors were always locked and you couldn't open them, unless you had someone from the inside buzz you in. Usually, it was some grumpy lady from the dorm administration, if you were unlucky, and it took them forever to open the door. I knew a girl who waited 15 minutes outside in the middle of the night and was still yelled at for being late. Anyway, I went out. It was a pleasant May evening, warm and quiet. I put in my headphones, lit the first cigarette, and headed to the ATB. It was the nearest 24/7 market with a 10-minute walking distance. While approaching the market, I noticed a man. He stood at the bus stop, which was strange, because it had been like an hour since the last bus, and the next one would be at 6 a.m. So, I figured he was either drunk or had nowhere to go and was about to get ready to call it a night and sleep at the bus stop bench, or was simply waiting for a taxi at a visible spot. The only way to cross the street without making a huge detour was to take an underground crossing near the bus stop. My craving for Dutch waffles was unbearable, and it was kind of a big street, with lots of cars going by here and there, and even in the middle of the night. So I took it. Before heading down the stairs, I looked back at the man and realized 3 things. Number 1, he didn't look like a homeless person. His clothes weren't fancy, but they were definitely clean and were the right size. His face was also clean. He was shaved and generally decent. Number 2, he wasn't drunk or high as far as I could tell. He stood firmly on his feet. There were no bottles or anything near him. His face was concentrated. His eyes were completely sober. And number 3, he looked directly at me. I stopped for a second to put out a cigarette and throw it in the trash bin. I looked at him and his eyes were just so intense. He didn't blink. His gaze didn't dart away. He just looked right at me with his completely focused stare, like he tried to remember everything that he saw. He then nodded. I nodded back and went for my Dutch waffles. I was afraid he would follow me into the underground crossing, but he stayed there. When I looked back, he was still staring at me. After a while, I was coming back with waffles in both hands. I honestly forgot about the man at the bus stop. It's not like he was the only strange person I met during my prior 2 years living in Kiev. And so, I was tired and really concerned about my German exam tomorrow. So yeah, I was coming back the same way, and it didn't occur to me that the man was still there until I saw him again. He stood at the same spot, exactly the same look, exactly the same heavy stare. I kind of started feeling nervous. My instincts were screaming to get out of there. This time, I wasn't looking directly at him, and I proceeded a little bit quicker. As soon as I passed him, lighting another cigarette, I heard footsteps behind me. I just tried to convince myself that he just finally decided to call it a night. But come on, why now? Why just after I passed by, heading to a poorly lighted, empty, small street? I began to walk quicker and quicker. His footsteps became quicker too. We were entering an empty, quiet street. It was still roughly a 5-minute walk to my dorm. It was almost 2 a.m. My hands were full of waffles. My own stupidity was never so obvious. At some point, I was almost ready to run. I even began to, but then the man called out to me. "Excuse me, young lady. Don't be scared. You just dropped your cigarettes. Here they are." I didn't stop. I was kind of panicked, tired. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours a day in a week. I didn't stop, but I did look back. And yeah, he did have a pack in his hand. A pack of the exact Winstons that I smoked. I slowed down, and then I realized one thing. I had a cigarette case back then, because A, it was cool, and B, I didn't want to smoke too much, as you couldn't put more than 10 cigarettes in there. I didn't carry cigarette packs around, never. And then, the man smiled and started to walk towards me, really fast. And boy, did I run. As soon as I started to run, he started running too. My heart sank. I was terrified. I really wanted to scream, but I decided to save my breath. He was quick, and the distance between us was getting smaller and smaller with every second. I went into full panic mode. I knew that after the next turn, we had a straight road leading to my dorm. Without any lights, perfect sprint material. I also knew that even if he wouldn't get to me on that road, I still wouldn't be able to open the door right away. And God knows what would happen to me before anyone else would be bothered to open the door. I had no time to call the police or someone inside. Meanwhile, the man was just running behind, silently, without any words, and menacingly. Because I had turned around one time to look, and I swear he was smiling. Barking dogs don't bite, and this man was sure about to bite. Something about him was completely off. Eerie smile, complete silence, and these focused, unwavering eyes. For a moment there, I was sure I was about to die, but then I took the last turn and saw another man. For a split second, I thought it was an accomplice of the man behind me, but then I realized it was another student, Alex, from the 3rd year. I'd seen him a couple of times in the dorm. All I could think to myself was, thank God. I ran faster. I screamed hysterically, something like, "Stop. Alex, stop, please stop." Thank God he stopped and turned around. The man behind me went slower. I didn't turn around before I reached Alex. When I did, I saw my pursuer standing by the turn, breathing hard, but still smiling. I started to tug on Alex's sleeve to get him going to the dorm. I was positive that that man would now run and catch us both after a quick time out. But he just waved to us. I don't know why I remember this, but it wasn't like a cool kind of wave. He waved clumsily, like a kid who is learning to give his mama a bye-bye wave, clapping his palm with his fingers, and then he ran off. That's basically all. We got into the dorm without any further adventures, rushing inside while I tried to explain what happened. Alex kind of read the mood, and I didn't even have to hurry him. I honestly don't know what would have happened if he wasn't there. I thanked him a million times after that. I never saw that man again, despite living 2 more years in the same dorm. I was terrified, but I still ate my waffles. After that, I got pepper spray. I still haven't used it, but now I feel a lot safer with it. Now it's just a scary story I tell my friends or Tinder dates when we run out of topics to talk about and the silence becomes too awkward. But something is still bugging me. The pack that man had in his hands were Winston's, the exact same Winston's I smoked. It never occurred to me until sometime later that there could possibly be 2 explanations. Either this was a pure coincidence, or he checked out the cigarette I put out before going down into the underground crossing and bought exactly the same pack while I was buying my waffles. And to be honest, the last one scares the shit out of me. So this happened a while back. I was probably around 10 to 11 years old, meaning my brother, who we'll call Alex, was around 8 to 9 years old. We were walking home from the bus, which takes about 7 minutes to do, when I noticed something was off. I didn't see anything at first, but I just knew that something was wrong. So my brother and I start walking home, as the only 2 who got off at our stop were him and I. This blue and silver beat-up truck drives past, and I didn't think anything of it. It never slowed down or stopped. I just kept going. Alex and I were holding hands, as my grandmother always told me to do with him, as he's my baby brother and I want nothing to happen to him. Nothing happens at first, but then the same truck drives around again, driving our way this time. There was a cul-de-sac at the end of our road. It was driving slower this time, and went up the road and turned out of sight. Now Alex and I were nearing the three-way intersection that connected the cul-de-sac road to the other side road, right off the main road the man just drove down. I happened to look down the street and see the truck driving, real slow, down the street towards us again. I knew we had to run. I knew there was no other option. I knew that if we didn't, my brother and I would not be safe. I don't know how I knew, but I did. As soon as we passed a house that blocked us from view, I turned to Alex and spoke to him. Exactly 4 words. No questions. Just run. And we did. In our driveway, which is about 100 feet long, there is a row of bushes and pine trees that divide our home from the next door neighbor. I dragged him in there and told him to be quiet and that I would explain later. I watched as the same truck drove down and around the cul-de-sac again before coming to a stop right in front of our house. I had to hold my brother's mouth shut because he was crying, and I was scared that whoever was following us would hear him and then hurt us. I was more worried for him than myself at this point. I was in fight or flight mode. I was the big sister. I had to protect him. I looked at him and said that the truck was following us. I told him not to be scared. I said I wouldn't let anyone hurt him, and it seemed to calm him down a bit. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the door to the truck opened, and out came a man. He was tall, skinny, and messy, short hair covered by a torn baseball cap, ripped jean shorts, and a puke green tank top. He entered our yard and looked around a bit. Alex and I were still in the bushes, and I was trying to find a way to get to our house safely without getting this dude's attention. The guy left after what felt like forever and entered his car. He started it and drove away slowly. I waited a few minutes to make sure he was gone before turning to my brother and saying, "We need to run. When I count to 3, we're gonna run behind the house to the back door, okay?" He agreed, and we waited a few more seconds before I started counting. I didn't have a good feeling about this, but I knew we had to move. I started counting, and as soon as I hit 3, we booked it across our driveway and into our front yard to go around the house. As soon as we left our spot, I heard it, the sound of accelerating. He saw us. He was waiting for us to leave. He chased us up our driveway as we ran around the side of the house. We entered and I slammed it shut, locking it and deadbolting it. I didn't stop running until I opened the house door and ran downstairs with Alex, screaming our safe word. My grandmother made a safe word for us that was a normal everyday word we could use if we were in danger. We just had to scream it, basically. It woke my aunt, who worked the night shift and was sleeping up until that point. We told her everything, and she stayed up with us until my grandmother got home. We called the police, and that was my first ever interaction with an officer. The man was never caught. To this day, I don't know what he wanted, but I'm sure it wasn't good. I'm just glad my grandmother drilled stranger danger into my head. I don't know where my brother or I would be right now if she hadn't. My wife and I were married during the summer of 2012 and planned a honeymoon trip to one of our favorite vacation spots, Aruba. We arrived in our hotel and began immediately mingling in downtown and soaking up the sunshine at the beach. As we visited a very prominent hotel, we noticed a sign for free horseback riding excursions. The catch was you had to sit through one of those very long and drawn-out timeshare speeches and actually see the timeshare housing. We got through that and were given horseback riding vouchers. The next day, I called the horse riding company and requested their service and told them we had vouchers for payment. They said they had an opening in 2 days and they would pick us up at the hotel. Fast forward a few days later, the company arrived at our hotel and picked us up in an old, run-down, beat-up van. Upon entering the van, I noticed that the driver's dashboard was lit up like a Christmas tree. I had never seen so many warning lights on at once. We close the door and he drives to the ranch. We could hear all sorts of noises that sounded like the van was crumbling right below us. We get out to the so-called ranch, and there are no other riders there. Just us. It's in a very remote area of Aruba, across the island away from the tourist sections. He tells us to wait over near a shed, and he will be back. As I look around, I see no horses, and I notice something weird. As I look through the shed window, I see it is completely empty. I walk over to the house and look through the huge glass door. Empty. My wife and I get a feeling of dread, as if something really bad was going to happen. As the owner comes back around the house, I ask where the other riders are. He says it's just me and my wife. Wouldn't he wait for more riders to save money? I tell him that my wife is feeling really sick and we wanted to go back to the hotel. He starts begging us to stay and asking her to hang out and wait with the nausea, saying that it would pass. I tell him that I want to go now or I will walk. He very slowly walks us back to the van, gets in the van, turns the ignition, and won't start. He exclaims, "I must have run out of gas." He then gets on the phone and begins speaking in what sounded like Spanish. He was shouting and sounded very upset. He hangs up the phone and says he has someone coming by to meet us there, to fix the car. I immediately take my wife by the hand and leave the van. We start walking very fast toward the hotel. As I'm walking, I see a taxi car in someone's driveway. As I look closer, I can see someone sitting on their front porch. I ask, "Can you give us a ride back to our hotel?" The gentleman on the porch did a double take, as it seemed he couldn't believe tourists would be walking around in this neighborhood. He says, "Yes." Then we get into the car, and he starts taking us home. He asks us where we're from, and we tell him, Connecticut. He starts listing cities around our hometown, and asks us a bunch of questions about Yale University. We get to our hotel, pay our fare, and immediately run to the front desk to report what happened to us. The front desk clerk said they don't work with that company typically, and that is why they don't recommend their guests going to other hotels and obtaining excursion vouchers. What would have happened? Probably nothing, but with Natalie Holloway in our mind, and the proven fact of sex trafficking, anything was possible. For reference, I was 19 years old at the time. I'm a female. I love camping. Anytime my friends and I came home from college, we would load up our cooler with beer, grab some gear, and go screw around outside. Unfortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or other friends ever wanted to go with me, so I would often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day, the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed some of my gear, hopped in a car I borrowed from a buddy, and drove to a spot that was secluded, yet within a safe distance to civilization that I could get up and run and get help. Camping also creeps me out sometimes, but that creepy feeling is somewhat of a plus for me. It's the same reason that people read these stories. It's fun to be scared. So I make a little camp and get a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much to eat, but I was enjoying myself, reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I got the feeling I was being watched, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I hear a twig crunch over to my right, and then see a doe bolt from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to the camp with an armful of wood I had gathered. I kept freaking myself out, hearing sounds just outside of the ring of light cast by the fire. I always get inside my head, so I had shrugged it off and kept whittling at a stick I'd been messing with. At around 1, I decided to get into my tent and snuff out the lantern. I'd been slamming beers in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars. Another reason I like camping. I can act however I want. I passed out relatively quickly. At about 2 a.m., I start hearing footsteps. They sound pretty light and sort of timid. I think to myself it's a deer or other animal, more likely a raccoon, because I'd probably left some food out. I'm still on guard though. About 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open, I hear a rubbing noise, and the tent fabric is being pushed in a bit. I don't know how I didn't shit my sleeping bag, but I just sat there, paralyzed with my K-bar in my hand. I desperately wanted to thrust the knife through the tent fabric, but I was still holding out hope that it was some of my buddies from a frat that were joking with me. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it all stopped. I was starting to feel slightly more secure due to the fact that daylight would be coming in about 2 or 3 hours, but I sure as shit wasn't going to go to sleep. All of a sudden, at about 4 o'clock, I realized I should have put my boots on so that if anything did happen, I would be ready. After having stayed up and keeping alert a little while longer, my friend's car alarm goes blaring. I freak out and run out of the tent. I got about 2 steps before something grabs me around the mouth. I open my mouth to scream, but instead, the person's pinky finger slips between my teeth. I've heard that people can perform superhuman feats when they have huge adrenaline rushes. In my case, I just clamped down, and his finger popped off. He screamed, pulled his hand away with the missing digit, falling to the ground. He took off running down the hill I was camping on, and I took off in the opposite direction. I must have looked ridiculous to the people whose house I ran to. A little sorority girl in a wife beater, boxers, and steel-toe boots. I also had some blood that oozed out of my lip. Not from the finger, but because I also took a pretty good chunk out of my lip as well. I told them what happened. They called the police, got me some real clothing, and the man at the house made me a whiskey and coke. When the cops got there, they checked it out, and when the police came back, it was light out. They brought me back so I could get my friend's car, and what I saw made me more scared. Right next to the tent was a red gas can. He could have just lit me on fire earlier. The finger was also gone, suggesting he had come back. The kicker is that they never caught the guy, so somewhere out there is a man sitting down to dinner, maybe alone, maybe with a wife and kids, and he's missing his right pinky. I was 15, and my aunt decided she wanted to take me away on a holiday, as my mom had died the year before and thought it would be good for me. We went to Spain. I've never been there or even abroad before, so everything was different and exciting. We were staying in an apartment, and across the road was a fancy hotel, which we tended to go to in the evenings because they had entertainment and family nights in the bar. As it was just the 2 of us, instead of taking up full tables that families could use, we just sat on 2 bar stools at the bar. A man used to patrol about the bar and go through a doorway, which leads to the toilets and stairs to the hotel rooms. He wore a white shirt tucked into dark trousers, with a belt. He also had a big bushy mustache, and I presume he was some sort of security guard, as he was always just checking on things. I noticed he would watch my aunt quite a lot, but never really thought anything of it. And one evening, he came over to talk. I don't know if he was Spanish, but he definitely had some sort of accent. He was adamant one evening that I got up to dance and leave my aunt. He was so persistent in trying to get rid of me, but I never moved, because being a teenager, I was shy and self-conscious and just wanted to watch the fun. My aunt needed to use the toilet and went through the doorway, but I didn't notice that he must have followed her. And when she came back, she was quite shaken. She said when she came out of the toilet cubicle and was washing her hands, she looked in the mirror and the creepy security guy was behind her. He kept trying to talk to her, and I'm sure he tried to kiss her. We decided to leave and try a few other places, and had quite a good night. Walking back to our apartment, we noticed a car following us. We freaked out and ran up an alleyway. We ended up in what looked like a desert. It was stupid of us in a foreign country, but we just freaked out. We waited until his car passed and hurried all the way back to our apartment. We ran up the stairs, opened the door, and I was about to turn the light on, but my aunt said no. Wait. She started crawling along the floor towards the window, and I followed. We both looked under the curtain, and I nearly fainted. The creepy security guy was standing across the street, watching the apartment windows. There were a fair few windows, so he wouldn't know which was ours, and luckily, because my aunt told me not to put the light on, he never found out. He stood for quite a while before he left. We never put the light on and stayed sitting under the window for a good hour or so. The next day was our last day, thank God. We went to the hotel for breakfast and subtly asked a member of staff about him. They said he was such a lovely man with a wife and a new baby. We never saw him again, and I can't remember if my aunt put in a complaint, but he really scared the shit out of us. I was on vacation with my cousins in the holiday home of my grandparents in the south of France, all alone at 3 a.m. It's kind of a castle that is gigantic, and the property makes about 12.5 hectares, and around that, it's kind of empty. There's not a single house less than a kilometer around. It was the summer of 2019, and Caesar, one of my two cousins, had just turned 19. So they asked me and my other cousin, Arthur, if we were okay enough to spend 2 weeks in the grandparents' house so they could finally do something without the rest of the family and have the house to ourselves. So we leave in early July to spend 2 weeks. That really looked like a crazy vacation. The first week goes really well. Being 17 to 19 years of age, the days consisted of being up at 1 p.m. for breakfast, 3 p.m. pool and sunbathe, and the rest of the day we had parties. It was every day with music to the full, alcohol in our bedroom, or at the pool when it was nice in the evening. The second week, we continued our usual routine, except that one night, around 1 a.m. to 2 a.m., we had stopped the music, and we started to hear small noises in the gravel on the path of the property. We didn't panic, because it's quite common that there are animals like foxes or even cats that spend the night, so it was nothing that really alarmed us. Everything is going well until the next day, when one more time we turned off the music and turned off every light, due to the fact that we were tired because my grandfather asked that we cut wood in the afternoon. So in short, we were exhausted. So it was 1 a.m., not even 30 minutes when we had turned the lights off. We talked about everything and anything, and then we heard the footsteps on the gravel. But this time, they were regular. I alert Arthur and Caesar and tell them that there is clearly a human walking on the gravel. I reacted suddenly and decide to go to the window to see if I can see someone. I figured I had no risk going to the window because the lights are off and whoever it was wouldn't be able to see me. That night, the moon gave off such a strong light that it could cast a shadow and you'd be able to see the shadow of a person. And unfortunately, that's what happened. Looking out the window, I saw the shadow of a man. He seemed to be looking for something. I stopped myself from yelling and quietly tell my cousins directly that there's someone outside and we need to make no noise. I came back to the window. The man had stopped moving and was looking at me. As I said earlier, we're in a pretty isolated place, so we have very little network and there's no Wi-Fi, so there was no way to contact anyone. So we're on the 3rd floor and the person gets closer to the entrance. The door was locked, but don't forget we're basically in a castle and everything needs to be renovated. So we're on the 3rd floor, and if this guy decides to break in and walk up the stairs, there would be no other exit. We hear the guy trying to open the door, and after he stops, he screams. Then I had an idea. That afternoon, we took my grandfather's air rifle to shoot targets hanging from trees, and we left it in the bedroom. So I told Caesar, and he went to go get the rifle and shouted, "Get out of here, we're armed." He fired blanks to make a noise. We heard the guy sprint as fast as he could, while Caesar continued shooting. We heard him get into a car that screeched and went off at full speed. We didn't sleep that night. But at least we never saw or heard anyone come back. We never told anyone because we were too afraid of being yelled at, and even today, when we talk about it, we ask ourselves the same question. What would have happened if we were sleeping at that moment, and he'd managed to get inside? A little while ago, my boyfriend and I took a trip to Mexico for our anniversary. Let it be known that we speak a fair amount of Spanish, enough to get us around comfortably. We started in Playa and moved to Cancun to hopefully get better beaches without as much seaweed. We took taxis to many places, including Playa to Cancun, which is about an hour drive, and we had no issues. On our anniversary, on the 20th, we went out and did normal daytime things in Mexico. We then went home and got ready for our evening out. We decided to go to a place called Toro Rojo because they're known for their super nachos, and boy do I love nachos. So we take off walking because according to the maps, it's not far off. We walk and walk and walk for 45 minutes. And I checked the time on Google Maps, and it says it'll be another hour walk, or a 5-minute drive. It was a pretty major highway we were walking on. We decided to hail a taxi, because honestly, I was in a rush for super nachos and daiquiris. The taxi pulls over to the side, and we hop in. We tell him, Toro Rojo, and he says he doesn't know where that is, so we hand him my phone with Google Maps pulled up. To get there, you needed to go straight and take a U-turn, and it would then be on the left. So, he starts driving down this highway, and I'm watching over his shoulder. We are getting closer to the U-turn, and he does not slow down. We pass the U-turn. I assume, okay, maybe he's missed it. I've done it 1,000 times before. He keeps driving. He passes another U-turn, and another. And I start to worry. I take my boyfriend's phone and type, "He keeps missing U-turns. Tell him it's the other way." In Spanish, my boyfriend tells him to go the other way to get to the restaurant. The guy keeps driving faster and faster, 40 kilometers over the limit now. He says, "Mi inglés es no bien." He keeps driving and driving, passing U-turn after U-turn. I start panicking. It's now hard to breathe. When I hear my boyfriend tell the guy, Aquí es bien. He keeps driving. My boyfriend yells this time, Aquí es bien. The driver finally slows down, and I leap out of the car. The man demands $30, which my boyfriend gave him happily, and we took off sprinting in the other direction. We look on maps, and he took us 9 miles outside of the city, so we are now 12 miles from our hotel. There is nothing around us except blackness and trees. It is now 11 p.m. Thankfully, I could call my mom and dad, and they talked to us while we walked. We were walking, trying to get ourselves to a hotel, so we could pull cash out. Seeing as the taxi driver took most of our cash, we wanted to get an executive taxi. It was an hour walk to the nearest hotel. We were walking, and suddenly, this red Mini Cooper starts slowly following behind us. They roll their window down and drive next to us, but don't say anything. At this point, we are both so on edge. My boyfriend smacks the side of the car and screams, Chupa mi verga. They finally speed off and away from us. Soon after that, we came up on 2 stray dogs. My boyfriend said, what if they aren't friendly? We grabbed 2 rocks just in case. This broke my heart as I am a pre-vet, but safety first. These dogs ended up being amazing and only wanting pets. So we pet them a bit and kept walking. Maybe 20 feet after these dogs, this red truck drives up next to us and asks, taxi? It was an unmarked car, not a taxi. We tell him no and wave him on. He doesn't start to drive away, and suddenly, these dogs come running and jumping at the car, barking so meanly. We run the other way because I trust dogs' intuition. We finally made it back to the hotel safely, but frankly, I am scared to go back to Mexico. So, a few years ago, my boyfriend's dad's family decided to get together and all chip in to rent a condo in Ontario and get together. There was a big, extended family over there that his dad never saw because he only really got along with one of his 3 sisters. My boyfriend's mom had talked him into going though, and they let me tag along because I'd been around long enough that they liked and trusted me. I can't remember where everyone else had gone. I think it was to the beach for like the 3rd time that day. It was just me and my boyfriend at the condo because we were just kind of sick of the beach and just wanted to do nothing in the shade for a while. We were sitting outside, looking over the water and just kind of talking about life. I just finished reading the Harry Potter series, so we were just kind of talking about that for a bit when this woman comes out of the brush beside the condo. Just for an idea, this condo was on about an acre of land, and it was kind of in the middle of nowhere. The front of the condo was probably 70 feet from a dirt road that no one really traveled down, and there were some dense trees and brush and whatnot that surrounded 3 sides of it. This woman comes out of the wooded area, and I immediately knew something wasn't right. She was limping, and she only had 1 sandal on, and frankly, she looked like shit. She was pale, and her face was gaunt. She was really pretty, but she just looked exhausted. The thing that immediately caught my attention was her baby, who she was holding pretty tightly in her arms. As she started to come towards us, I didn't really know what to do, but my boyfriend immediately got up and walked over to make sure she was okay. I couldn't help but think of all the awful things that might happen after spending so many hours hearing these horror stories on Reddit. I was just terrified she'd do something. My boy is a lot more trusting than I am though, and he's always had the first instinct of, what's the problem, how can I help? He's never assumed the bad in anybody. So this woman is just sobbing. By the time she gets to the porch of the condo, she looks like she's just been through a war zone. She's shaking and hyperventilating and crying, and she's telling us that basically her boyfriend had been drunk for a while, and he's been getting worse and worse, and that he's been an overall abusive guy. He'd get pissed whenever she was focusing on the baby instead of him, and part of what pissed him off was that it wasn't his kid, so he kinda didn't care about the baby at all. She told us how this time in particular, he was drunk and she was driving him home with the baby in the back seat. He grabbed the baby's booster seat, tore it out of the car, and threw it out the window while they were driving. She got the baby out of the seat or something. I don't remember how, because as she's telling us about how he started hitting her before she took the baby and ran, we hear this yelling. And we turn around and see this angry dude walking up to the condo, and she starts losing it. Drunk and angry, this guy followed her to our condo and was starting to come up to us. He was trying to act like he wasn't pissed. He was doing a, "Oh, you guys found her. Thank you so much. Baby, let's go home," kind of thing. But he was slurring his speech and not doing a good job of hiding how pissed he was. My boyfriend has always been a pacifist. Honestly, he's even kind of a pushover. He's really non-confrontational and tries to find a way to talk stuff out and come to an agreement before doing anything. But before I could even say anything, he's across the yard and approaching this guy. As much of a pacifist as he is, he's also huge. He's built like a football player, 6'3", and at the time he was 230 pounds. I've known my boyfriend since we were 10. At the time, we were 20, and we'd been dating for just over a year. I knew him better than anyone. He's never done anything like this before. But he goes up to this guy and goes, "Not another step, dude." And he's shaking as he says it. This guy tries to walk around my boyfriend and goes, "No, it's okay. I'm just gonna take her home." And my boyfriend steps in front of him and shakes his head. "You're drunk," he said, "so I'm gonna pretend like maybe you didn't get what I just said. Don't come any closer." It's at this point the guy stops trying to pretend and he says something like, "You don't know what's going on. That's my girlfriend. I'm gonna take her home." And he tries rounding my boyfriend again, and one more time my boyfriend blocks him and goes, "Stop." I've never heard this tone in his voice before or since. It was scary. It wasn't him. The guy tried one more time before my boyfriend finally put his hand on his chest and pushed him back a bit. Keeping his hand on the guy's chest, I'm telling you right now, you're not going anywhere near that girl and her child, so turn the fuck around and walk away. This guy was about 5'6", maybe 5'7", so when he looked up to threaten my boyfriend, he looked like a child. The guy finally looks up at my boyfriend and says something that I couldn't hear. My boyfriend said something back, and then the guy just stared at him for a moment, like he was deciding whether or not to do anything. My boyfriend finally pushed him away, and the guy stumbled back. He started pointing at me and the girl as he was saying something, and then he started to walk away. I didn't learn till the next day, but the guy told my boyfriend that he had a gun and that he was coming back, saying that he'd kill him and I if we stopped him again. The woman was sobbing, the baby was sobbing, and I was shaking, because even though he didn't throw any punches or anything, I could tell that he was ready to hurt this guy if anything else happened. We called the police and didn't really do much of anything outside of make sure everyone was breathing and take the girl to her sister's place. We didn't really hear much from her after, but I know my boyfriend sent her an email once or twice, and she's married now to someone else and had another kid the last time they talked. It was a really nice trip despite that part, and the fight that my boyfriend's dad got into with someone in his family. I found as I am writing this that the memories of July 27th, 2015 are as clear as ever. My name is Kat, and I live in a small town right outside of Houston, Texas. I am married and have a son who recently graduated from Texas, A&M, and 2 stepkids, or bonus kids as I like to call them. For privacy purposes, I will say my husband's name is Evan. So here's what transpired to be the worst night of my life that I could ever have imagined. On the night of July 27th, 2015, Evan and I had a fight over something I can't even really remember. He took off, so I thought, well, let me show him that 2 can play this. So I hopped in my Honda SUV and took off. The reason I mentioned the type of vehicle will become clear in a bit. I went not even half a mile from home to a gas station and put gas in my car. As I was at the pump, a familiar car drove by and pulled in the drive furthest from the pumps, which led to the back of the store. My cell phone rings, and it was a girl I knew. We shall call her B. She says, "Hey, is that you at the pumps?" And when I confirmed it was, she says to me, "Pull around here when you're done. I'm cleaning trash out of my car." I said okay, not seeing any red flags whatsoever. It was 10 p.m. It was well lit, and there were cameras everywhere. First, a little background on this B broad. I met her through mutual friends. She was a little annoying, and none of the other girls in my group liked her, as I came to find. I have a big heart. I don't like to see people's feelings hurt over petty bullshit. So, I was always nice to her, and made sure she was included. What a mistake that was. I finished pumping my gas and got in my car, and then drove around to where she was. She walked up to my passenger window and said hey, and then the next thing I know, there was a commotion and 2 guys were in my face with guns. One punched me in the face so hard, it stunned me. They forced me into my back seat. All the while, one of them is continuously punching me in my face. I kept thinking, why isn't B helping me out? Why are they just letting her go? And then through my tears and terror, I saw one of the pieces of shit hand her my wallet. I was floored. This person I was good to set me up for some reason. So one guy is driving my car, while the other one has me in the back seat. I'm on the floor, but I can recognize where we are. At one point, I tried to open the door and roll out of the car at 45 miles per hour. I didn't care if I got hurt or not, I just wanted out. I thought about the stupid fight with Evan, about my son, and how I wanted to watch him graduate college. I thought about how I didn't say I love you enough to those I love. My mom passed away many years before this, and I was crying for her. I wanted her arms around me and to tell me it would be okay. The loser in the back seat said, "Yeah, bitch, you better cry for your mama, 'cause I want to kill you, but my partner says no," while putting a gun in my mouth. He hit me a few more times, till the dude driving actually said, "Stop hitting her, that's enough." What a sweet guy. Not. So I finally realized they are driving to my house with B following behind. They asked me about our safe, and is it unlocked or bolted down? I realized that the dumb girl had seen the safe one time when she was over, and must have told Dumb and Dumber it was filled with cash, jewelry, that kind of thing. But it wasn't quite, more like birth certificates, documents, etc. And our handgun, which we kept locked in there. My head was spinning. I was trying to think what to say, all while trying to keep myself conscious. I knew I couldn't pass out, because that would be certain death in my mind. So I told them the safe is wide open, the lock was broke, and it was not bolted down, and there was cash inside of it. I know lying is wrong, but I think this time I got a hall pass. So we pull up to my house, and thank God my honey was not there. Because they had guns, and most likely would have shot him. He, as it turns out, came home to find me gone and was out looking for me. They pull out some duct tape and flimsy rope and proceed to tie my ankles, hands, and wrap duct tape around my head and tell me to stay put. Yeah, okay, sure will. Thank God I had this little SUV with no trunk. By the time that these two morons made it to the front door, I had already untied my hands and feet. Mind you, they had my house key, and I guess stood there for a minute, looking right up at our security camera, but learned later they kicked the door in. I waited till I thought they were in, although I knew I only had a couple of seconds to run for my life. I slowly opened the passenger back door and rolled onto the concrete, kicked my flip-flops off, and then took off like an Olympic sprinter, screaming at the top of my lungs and running in a zigzag motion. I thought I heard steps behind me, but I would not stop. There was a house at the end of my street that had a big old pit bull that was always outside on a very long chain. He was going crazy, barking, and for some reason, I ran up in his yard. Mind you, at this point, my face swelled up so bad I could hardly focus. Well, I swear on everything I know and love that this vicious dog that I was always scared of looked at me, sat down, stopped barking, and gave me a look like, "Go on, it's okay." I ran onto their driveway and got into an SUV they never drove, crawled in the back, and hid under a pile of tires. I was so scared and hyperventilating, but I was alive. I laid there for what seemed like forever, but it was actually 20 minutes till I got the nerve to get out. I walked slowly down the driveway and looked down at my house and saw my car there. But the car B was driving was gone. Oh yeah, forgot to mention she followed them and parked in front of the neighbor's house. I guess as an idiot lookout person. When I rolled out of the car and saw her sitting there, I gave her a middle finger salute. So as I was going slowly down the street, dizzy, crying, hurting, I looked behind me and saw the most beautiful sight ever. My husband's truck driving up. He didn't see me at first and proceeded to go onto our drive. I freaked out, thinking what if they were hiding or something. So I ran into my neighbor's yard, and by the time he got out of the truck, I was climbing up the fence, screaming at him not to go into the house. This woke my neighbors up. It was 12:30 in the morning by this time. My poor husband was so confused. He starts yelling at me to get down off the fence. My neighbor comes out and tells him to stop yelling at me, and then they both got a look at my face. My neighbor asked to call 911, and my husband tells him yes, and proceeded to break down. I couldn't even talk, and at this point, everything was blurry. Next thing you know, 4 sheriff's vehicles pull up along with 2 cop cars and an ambulance. I told them as much as I could and gave them the girl's name, but by this time, I was going into shock. They were worried I had a concussion. My husband was crying, and as I was giving names, one of the cops looked at my husband and said, "I know that look in your face, boy, and you need to get the thoughts out of your head of what you and one of your buddies are going to go do." That cop definitely read his mind. So I get in the ambulance with him following behind, and one of the EMTs and ER nurses were 2 angels sent to me. They held my hand as I was scared and told me it was okay. No one could hurt me. I freaked out when they were wheeling me down to get a CAT scan, till I saw the cop who was following close behind the stretcher. I had a slight concussion, busted sinus cavity, and bruises on both sides of my face down to my chin. A shot of morphine and I got to go home. In the days that followed, I went to stay with some really close friends because I was too scared to go home. I did not return home until October of that year. I came home a different person, my bubbly, always cracking jokes, smiling at strangers and friends, was gone. I was scared of the world and angry as hell. I worked with the police, but that bimbo skipped town, and from what I understand, I don't know for sure, Dumb and Dumber were both involved in bad accidents. By the way, the safe in the house was open because my husband had bought a new one, so all they got was a $5 bill that was laying out and some change. My taking off running foiled anything they had planned to steal. Today, I am better and stronger and don't require babysitters as much. I am grateful to be alive and that I have my friends and family, and best yet, got to see my son graduate college. I am more aware of everything now and would not wish this upon anyone. I find myself wanting to say to the Three Stooges, was it really worth the maybe $7 you got out of it? So my story begins about 3 years ago. I was a new mother and was given the task of setting up a moving company to move myself, my 6-month-old, and my husband to a new apartment. I called a few and got a few prices. Finally, I found one that I thought would fit our budget, as we had a very small studio apartment to move. The man I spoke to, I'll call Mr. X. He told me he would have to come over and see the place, and then would give me a final price for the move. I told him that would be fine, as long as my husband was home to deal with them. We are stationed overseas, and it's just easier for the man of the house to deal with any business matters. I made an appointment with Mr. X on a day my husband would be home. Mr. X arrived on time. As soon as I opened my door, I felt something was off. I just got a very creepy feeling from this man, yet I was polite and led him to our living room. He spoke with my husband as I attended my daughter. I could feel this man's eyes on me, and I looked up and just smiled. I sat down next to my husband and listened to the two men as they spoke. The whole time, Mr. X's eyes never left me. I just thought to myself, this must be the way it works here. Maybe he doesn't think he's being weird. Well, my husband and Mr. X set a price and a date to move us. My husband said I would have to be home alone with our daughter when we were moved. My stomach sank, but I wasn't going to put up a fuss over a feeling. I could have been totally overreacting. The day came for the move, and Mr. X had been sending me messages via text, saying, "Would you like me to bring boxes? I can bring anything for you that you like. I can do anything for you. I want to do anything for you. You are such a beauty." I just simply replied, "Oh, no thanks. We're all set. I have everything packed." Mr. X arrived at my door at the appointed time. He had brought 5 other men with him to help us move. I greeted each man in the manner that was expected of me, via culture. The men spoke amongst themselves in their language, and I sat down tending to my daughter. I had to keep her calm as she was nervous around strangers. Mr. X kept his eyes on me each and every time he came into the home to move things. His colleagues ignored me pretty much, unless they needed to ask or tell me something. Mr. X stopped to talk to my daughter in this sickening sweet tone. I held her tighter in my arms as she began to scream. He smiled at me and said both mom and child are such beauties. Of course, English is not his first language. He picked up something heavy, and I reminded him to please be careful with himself. That was my first mistake, as he grinned at me and winked, saying to me, "Oh, pretty girl, don't worry. I am strong. I can even hold you up." The men finished after 3 hours, and finally my husband came home. I told him all I had been told, and he told me That's how they are here. They don't understand some things. My husband, of course, stayed close to me and our daughter for the rest of the time they were loading the truck up. At one point, I was alone with Mr. X again, as my husband carried some things to the car. I walked around the house one last time and noticed Mr. X following me. I was holding our daughter and sweetly said to her, "Okay, say bye-bye to our first home." Mr. X made an odd sound, and I turned to see him looking me up and down. I brushed past him and he shut the door. He smiled at me, saying, "You are too sweet. You are too kind. Your husband is a lucky man. I work out. I take care of myself. I wish my wife was like you. So fit, so small." I said, okay. Well, my husband is waiting. I need to go." He followed me down the stairs, all the while saying, yes. I walked faster, as fast as I safely could, down the stairs with my daughter. I got in the car and told my husband. Of course, he was very, very upset and said he would speak to the man. He of course did when we arrived at the new place, and it seemed not to even faze Mr. X. He kept on watching me and smiling. He would come and say things to me every now and then, but I stopped even listening and kept my daughter pinned to me in her carrier. The men unpacked us and were paid. Finally, they left. I thought, thank God, that's the end of it. Nope. Not in the slightest was this over. He found me on Facebook, through the group I hired him in, and he began sending me messages, sending me kissing faces, or love quotes and pictures. He even sent me a few selfies of himself. I just left everything on scene, and of course showed my husband each time. Of course we knew we could not report anything, because, well, he hadn't broken any laws. Well, this kind of thing continued for a while, and he would tell me how pretty I was, or how he wished his wife was like me, how fit and sexy I was. I finally blocked him, but he made another account and kept up the same ways. Finally, he left me alone for about a year, but he found me again recently and has been asking if I'm still in the country, if I am married, and if I want to meet up. That he will do anything for me, that he would love to see me again because I was a beauty, that I was so amazing, that I was a good mother, just anything he could think of to bring my attention to him. I once again blocked this account. Once again, he made another account, saying he knows where I live. He will come by and pick me up so we can hang out. I said no, my husband will not approve and I do not want to. He said, "Why? You are such a beauty. Please, I will be here for you. I like you. I want to see you." I said no and blocked him. 1 month ago, he found me and wrote to me, saying I was being a bad friend in person because I wouldn't give him the time of day, that he wanted to take me to dinner and buy me a gold necklace, that he wanted me to be his second wife to have his babies. I told him no, and to leave me alone, to go to his wife and children. He then told me he was down on his knees like a beggar to beg me to see him, that I was breaking his heart, that it was his dream to be my husband. I told him to stop trying to contact me, that I would go to his wife or the police. He told me, "Be careful with your words, my dear. Be careful with letting me go. I can find you and your children. You do not know what I can do for my love for you." I blocked him again and moved on. I went to a nearby mall a few days later, and he was standing at a coffee shop. As he saw me, his face lights up and he walks over towards me. I felt every ounce of color drain out of my face. I turned on my heel and spotted a security guard. I walked over to him and said I was being followed. He looked up at Mr. X and told him he needed to stop right there and not move. The man then took me to my car and I thanked him so much. He said it's fine, we must protect our sisters. Since that day, I do not go out without my husband. I have not heard from him or seen him. Let us hope he is no longer in the country. Each year, one of my closest friends and I, who we will call Dane, go down to visit his grandparents at their cabin in a nice, small peaceful town in the North Georgia mountains. My friend, his grandpa, and I are all outdoorsy kind of people, so we were always looking for something fun for all of us to do around the area. One night, we decided to go on a hike on a trail not too far from the cabin. Now, this isn't the kind of trail you're probably thinking of. It's really a gravel dirt road, but a lot of hunters, campers, motorbikers, and backpackers use it. We head out to the trail, and right as we pulled up to it, we were gonna go hike, when we noticed an old beat-up, suspicious-looking black Chevy SUV with two middle-aged men in it, parked next to the entrance of the trail. Now, even though this area is safe, drug deals and all kinds of sketchy activity can occur deep in these woods. So we avoided going on that trail and decided to head down another one, about a half mile down the road. We pulled up about 50 feet or so into the trail, just outside of the view from the road. We parked the truck and got out, and we began our hike. Our hike was off to a great start until we got about a mile in. We started to hear a dog bark from about 300 feet away. We decided to keep going, but the dog just wouldn't stop barking, and we didn't know if the dog was on a leash or not and could possibly attack us. So we decided to turn around and head back. When we were about 1,000 feet or so away from the truck, we could see a car sitting behind my friend's grandpa's truck, running with its headlights on. This instantly made us worried, because who would just roll up behind a random truck at 10 at night on an isolated trail? And keep in mind, you would have had to drive into the trail to see where we parked. It was not visible from the road. We stood there for about 5 minutes, trying to see if we could see anybody, but since it was so dark and pretty far away, it was hard to see anything. Fortunately for us, there was a pretty large tree next to the trail, where we were able to stand behind, so there was no way they could see us from where they were parked. My friend's grandpa took these night vision binoculars with us, and tried to get a better look, but it was still not much help. We decided to just stand there and wait for them to turn around and leave, because there was no chance we were going to be able to walk back with this random car and potential bad people in it sitting behind our truck. After about 10 minutes of just standing there, to my absolute horror, the car drives around the truck and starts to head down the trail in our direction. As fast as we could, we climbed up a hill that was next to us and hid behind a log that was on the top. A few seconds later, the same beat-up black Chevy SUV we saw outside the other trail comes driving down where we just were standing. Not even 15 seconds after, the car had its windows rolled down and started to slow down as they drove past us. We were terrified. Our hearts were pounding out of our chests, and we were scared these guys would stop and sit there, or even worse, get out and start looking for us. Fortunately, the car just kept driving and never stopped. As soon as the car was out of sight, we got out of our hiding spot, booked it back to the truck, and got the hell out of there. I know this may not be as scary as some others, but to us, it was definitely pretty frightening. We don't know who or what those guys wanted. My guess is that they had a stash on the trail, deeper in the woods, and maybe thought we'd stumble upon it or something, and they were out there to confront us, or even worse. A lot of things could have gone wrong. We could have walked up to the truck just as they pulled in. What if they came out and looked for us? What if they slashed the tires to the truck? Or what if they turned their headlights off and sat there and waited for us to come back? My friend and his grandpa actually went back in the daytime a few days later to the exact spot where we were hiding and took some pictures. They said we were very lucky to have made it up there successfully, as it seemed impossible to do as fast as we did, especially with all the shrubs and thorns in the way. If we got up there just even 2 seconds later, we would have been seen. I can only imagine what would have happened if we didn't make it up the hill, and those guys saw us. So this happened in October 2019. At the time, my home Wi-Fi had been out for 3 weeks, and my provider was taking forever to reconnect it. I needed the internet to work, so I've been staying at people's houses and at hotels at night, just so I could work. For this week, I was staying at my aunt's house, since it was near my place. It's important for me to mention that aside from my aunt and uncle, her oldest child and his family were also staying at the house at that time. This included his wife and 3-year-old daughter, my niece. My cousin and his wife come home from work at around 9 p.m., and you can tell that they're home because they honk their car horn at the front gate. This is a tall gate, so you cannot see the car over it, but you can see the shadows and lights leaking in from the bottom. Then one of us goes out to the gate to let them in. I mention the gate because I began to hear persistent tapping on it at around 3 a.m. On my first night of working there, the tapping didn't sound like a tree branch knocking against the gate because of the wind. It had a consistent rhythm and speed, almost like someone was really trying to get my attention. Naturally, I was very annoyed and pissed off by this, and went to check if it was some late-night prankster or not. But when I went to check the gate, I couldn't see any shadow of a person at the bottom. This was when I began to get scared. I decided to ignore the tapping and continue to work, but I kept hearing it throughout the night. When I finished work and got home, I couldn't sleep properly. I felt really nervous when I went back to my aunt's house to work during the second night. And it happened again. At this point, I was pretty much convinced that this was likely paranormal now. I felt like I had to bring it up with my aunt. I figured she'd be more of a believer than a skeptic, especially because the activity really seemed persistent. I told her during breakfast after the second night of tapping. I didn't expect her to believe me, but I was wrong. According to my aunt, her house has always been prone to paranormal activity whenever there was a young child living in the home. The reason why I never experienced anything before was because my aunt's youngest child is already an adult. So my niece is the first time that a child has been living in the house, in quite literally decades. My aunt shared that she'd been trying to cleanse the house because the activity was already frightening my niece. Even if my family is Roman Catholic, my aunt was using every kind of cleansing ritual she could find. So aside from a house blessing, she also asked a faith healer to do a cleansing on her grandchild, and she suggested that I have myself cleansed too. I agreed. When it was my turn, the shaman placed oil on my forehead and blotted paper onto it to find out what was happening to me. According to her, there were black dwarfs who had gotten attached to me and were playing around with me. They were the reason why I was having trouble sleeping, even when I tried to take a nap during work. Afterward, she blotted my forehead again and showed me that the patterns indicated 2 elemental beings. One of them was even wearing a crown. She said that I had 2 white dwarfs who usually protected me, but because I hadn't been staying at my house to work, the black dwarfs saw an opening and decided they would have some fun with me. I think those bastards had too much fun, as I was tired and quite angry. The shaman then prayed over me, chanting something to herself while burping several times. My aunt later told me that the shaman burping meant that a supernatural being was being removed from me. After the ritual, I thanked my aunt and went home. I shit you not, I slept incredibly well after that. I'm not sure if it was just because of the cleansing, but I won't dismiss the possibility that it helped somewhat. When I went back to my aunt's house a month later, I didn't experience anything weird anymore. I am a 28-year-old male from central England in the UK. This happened in March, as I was outside helping my family, mounting up a very strong fence to keep out eavesdroppers I've been experiencing. I didn't believe it until my family reported hearing muffled sounds or quiet talking in our passageway outside. And then one of the days during the night, I heard it myself. Our house is semi-detached. There are 3 more semi-detached houses to the right of our house, with a row of 3 more small houses joined to each other. There is a field with a park to the back of my house, and a small tree situated near our path. So here is the story. It was during March this year, when I was helping my family construct the fence, as we were using tools or whatever we could to make it very strong to avoid being damaged, or if there were stormy weathers. We have had people try and damage our place even though we did nothing to them, maybe because someone had been putting them up to it, who knows. As we were constructing the fence, a neighbor's kid had come out shouting to me, "What are you looking at? I will fuck you up." Me and my brother laughed and continued. Then he started walking closer on the road, approaching our place. He started pulling at his pockets. "Yeah, what you gonna do now?" he said. I picked up my hammer just in case, with adrenaline on pause. I said, "Fuck off. Move from our place and get the fuck away. Move now, I'm not gonna tell you again." I have had some PTSD, and possibly a mild traumatic brain injury due to a vile scumbag in the past years that had thrown a brick at my head for no reason. That would be another story. The kid went to get his dad as he laughed like some sort of pirate. His father was around 6'3", with a stocky build, and had a metal pole in his hand, shouting in a rage of anger, You threatened my boy. Was it you?" I said I did not threaten him, and that I told him to clear off from my place. He and my brother first had some conversation I can't fully remember. This deranged dad said to my brother, "I don't know who you were talking about passing through this place, but it certainly wasn't us." Shortly after him and my brother spoke, I tried explaining about his kid. He then said, "You," and brought the metal pole to my neck. He had not swung fully at my neck, but placed it on top. I could see that psycho look in his eyes. "Now, if you ever threaten my boy again, then I swear, I'll cut you into pieces." I was horrified, and in my terror, my adrenaline had raced to 200, like a Ferrari. My brother picked up a drill and pressed the button. It was then they had ran. In my panic and terror, I had picked up my pizza plate from the kitchen and started swerving it at him from my driveway as he had went to the small grass patch. Then he started calling us a bunch of liars. If we had been lying, why would we act out in this sort of aggression? We called the police, and they sent out 2 armed cops with a taser and a gun. One cop trying to comfort me, and the other one talking with my mom and brother. He listened and took a full statement on body camera. He had then said, "Don't worry, we will try to get to the bottom of this." I then replied to him, "You need to. He is clearly a danger, and he could do it to almost anyone." He agreed. They had some local police come to speak with us 3 days after for the investigation, but nothing happened. Maybe due to the fact they couldn't find out who it was. He was involved with others in one of the 3 smaller houses, and he was not able to question them. Sounds puzzling. It made my PTSD worse. Thanks to the good doctors and nurses for supporting me and giving me strong anti-seizure meds when I had them. Once we have constructed the fence all around, I plan on moving away and having a CCTV system that has remote access. Only when incidents occur, I will set it to record. My brother will probably support my mom. As for the deranged dad, let's never meet again. This happened to me when I was at university. It was my first time living away from home. I lived alone in a flat that my family found for me to rent near town. Because I joined the course late, and the university didn't have enough spaces to provide all new students with accommodation. It wasn't easy to make friends living off campus, but I joined some uni groups for sports, religion, music, that kind of thing, and eventually found one where I got on well enough with several people to meet up outside of the group. There were 2 girls I bonded with, but they didn't get on with each other. It was awkward trying to hang out in a 3, so in the end, I gave up and spent time with them separately. But the very first person I got to know from that group was a boy. He asked if we could exchange numbers after one of the group sessions. I gave him my number, but when he texted, asking to meet for a drink, I made it clear I wasn't looking for anything more than friendship. And if he was expecting more, it would be better if we didn't meet at all. I experienced situations in the past with male friends, constantly pushing for something I didn't want, to the point the friendships had to end. These experiences made me reluctant to hang out with guys, but although I've had a few close female friendships, I typically get on better with men. To this day, my longest running friendships that have survived time, or one of us moving away, are with men. So I didn't want to close myself off to male friends. I hoped any problems would be avoided if I made it very clear from the start that I wasn't looking for anything romantic. He said he was fine with that. We went out a few times and it seemed platonic. So it was a surprise when we met up for a 3rd or 4th time, and he said he was disappointed when he read my initial text and was hoping to change my mind. I probably should have walked away at that point, but I was naive and wanted to keep the few friends I had. I told him I didn't see him as more than a friend. He said he accepted this and wanted to continue being friends. The next time we met, we decided to stay in to save money. I invited him to mine because I felt safest in my own environment rather than going someplace where I'm unfamiliar with exits, locks, where weapons are stored, and so forth. Downside is the other person knows where you live, but I took the risk. The first time he came round, his behavior wasn't too bad, but he kept hinting that he wanted to be more than friends. I said I didn't want a relationship because I didn't want to be cheated on, and he said cheating is inevitable. He claimed he wouldn't mind if his girlfriend cheated, as long as she didn't cheat after marriage. Seriously. I said if someone can't be faithful before marriage, they certainly won't be after. This was a huge red flag for me. I didn't find him attractive or like him in that way, but this would have been a deal breaker if I did. He pretty much admitted he would cheat, despite it being my worst fear. I wish I had ended the friendship here, because in hindsight, he was never going to be platonic, but he hadn't been violent, and I didn't feel unsafe with him around at this point. So when he asked to go for a drink the following week, I repeated that I didn't want to be more than friends, and he needed to stop talking about sex, because it was making me uncomfortable. And he agreed. I had injured my ankle training for a marathon and was limping. Don't run on concrete in cheap shoes. The walk to the pub wasn't easy with my injury. I went to the bathroom at one point. The toilets were through a door into a narrow corridor, On the way out, I was limping down the corridor towards the door, and a guy came out of the men's toilets. He was stuck behind me because there wasn't enough room to overtake in the corridor. When I got to the door, I held it open for him. Back at the table, my friend accused me of having sex with the man in the toilets because we came out together. I didn't know that man. We were just customers at the same pub, and we left the bathroom area at the same time because he couldn't get past me. I thought maybe my friend was joking, and I didn't pick up on it. He was foreign with a strong accent, so there was sometimes a language barrier. The next time we planned to meet, my friend suggested meeting at my flat again, so I didn't have to walk anywhere with my ankle. I agreed, and he asked what day he should come around. I said something like any day between Monday and Thursday. He said Tuesday would be good for him. Tuesday turned out to be Valentine's Day. I hadn't realized this, and it was the day he chose. Yet, he turned up acting like it was a Valentine's date that had been my idea. He gave me a present. It was thongs from Asda. What happened to flowers and chocolate? Even these would have been inappropriate because I'd been clear from the start. I didn't want anything romantic. I said thank you out of typical British politeness, not really knowing what to do. Later, he started verbally pushing for sex quite insistently. I got upset and said it just wasn't what I wanted. He got up, bent down in front of my chair as if to comfort me, but then pinned me against my chair and started groping me. I tried to stand up and couldn't. I asked him to let me up twice, but he refused. I was starting to panic. My phone had fallen down to the side of the chair. I could reach it, but didn't know if I'd be able to make a call without being able to see the screen, and I'd worried he'd snatch it off me if I brought it to where I could see. Then I heard my upstairs neighbor stomping on the ceiling. It was a huge relief to know he was in. I asked my friend to let me up one more time, planning to scream for my neighbor if he refused. Thankfully, he let go, maybe because he heard the neighbor as well. Then he left in a strop, as if he was the one that had something to be upset about. I didn't know what his thoughts were, or if he was hoping I would be more cooperative with his desires if he got forceful. But it was a frightening experience, and I didn't see that friend again. This was before Me Too, so anyone I told didn't think he'd done anything wrong. Someone on my uni course even said I should give the friendship another chance. I considered it, but when I messaged him to say the events of Valentine's Day could never happen again, he said it was up to me whether it happened again. It's not up to me whether he does that again. So I said we clearly wanted different things and shouldn't see each other again. Post Me Too, supportive words from others have made me realize that nothing I could have or should have done differently made what he did okay. I gave him too many chances and probably should have told him the thongs were inappropriate, instead of trying to be polite. But this doesn't excuse his behavior. After a small but less frightening experience, I now never invite someone to my home or go to theirs until I know and trust them. It's been nearly 10 years, and I don't think that ex-friend is in the country anymore. But let's not meet again. Not long ago, my partner and I were driving through reservation land at about 11 o'clock at night in the desert southwest of the USA. We were on a major highway, but as with so many highways in that area, it's not very well used, just barely paved, and with only one lane going in each direction. No lights, just reflectors embedded in the pavement. It's not uncommon to go for an hour on this highway without seeing another vehicle. I was reading a book aloud when suddenly my buddy who was driving interrupts then paused on the side of the road, braking quickly. "Did you see that?" "No," I replied. "See what?" "That van. It went off the road." I turned in my seat, but couldn't make out anything, on or off the road. It was just darkness all around. He grabbed the flashlight that we kept in the car and asked me to call 911. He's in a medical profession and a lab licensed EMT, and I've worked in emergency response, so this isn't a super uncommon occurrence for us. Although, not being able to see the accident was a first for me. I got on the phone with 911 immediately and set about trying to find a mile marker using my phone as a flashlight, eventually settling for giving them approximate GPS coordinates, as I had very little coverage and my GPS was acting flightingly in that area. The dispatcher asked me to cross the highway carefully and try to ascertain the situation of the passengers, since they had gone straight over a hill and presumably into the canyon below. I stayed on the line while I trudged over the sand dunes on the opposite side of the highway. I was a bit nervous to be walking in this area in sandals, as we had just recently been discussing the rattlesnake population in the region, and I couldn't really see where I was going and answer the dispatcher questions at the same time. But the scrubby vegetation gave me some purchase, and I finally crested the largest dune and could see the outline of the accident site. On the road, the moonlight was blocked by the dunes, but on this side, it was strangely bright. It took my brain a moment to make sense of what I was seeing. They had been lucky. The van had turned on its side as it slid, and the friction from the dunes had just barely prevented the entire thing from going over the edge into the massive canyon below. My partner called out to me and asked me to check on the woman in the van, and I saw that next to him, standing with a scarecrow-like stiffness, was a young man. He looked dazed and didn't seem to be answering many questions. I got the darkest vibe off that guy that I've ever encountered. I felt goosebumps crawling up my back, and it was just like there was a permanent ring of shadow around him. I felt very uneasy knowing that either of us were anywhere near him, and made a point to keep visually checking up on them. I proceeded to the site around the van and called out to identify myself. I heard the voice of a woman inside, and as I walked around the windshield, I could see her. She was crouched in the passenger cabin, clearly in shock, her feet bleeding as she shifted back and forth in the broken glass of the driver's side window. A tall, willowy woman, thin and pale, with dark hair. There was also a massive wolfhound, panting. It appeared equally stunned. I saw that they had managed to pry the passenger side door open, and the man must have climbed through the top that way. The woman spoke with me for a time, calmly, and with an urgency I couldn't quite identify in her voice. And I relayed the information to the dispatcher. Yes, it was just the two of them. No, they don't seem to be seriously injured. No, nobody had fallen asleep at the wheel. They were on their way to Texas to visit family. They were living out of the van. What I remember most clearly is that I made a couple of attempts to convince her to either climb out of the roof or through the back to clear away from the van just to be safe, but she politely refused each time. She said that she didn't want to leave the dog. There was something just wrong about her demeanor. People react differently to stress, and she seemed alert and competent. So I put it to the back of my mind, but I kept being struck by a strangeness in her handling of the situation. Dispatch and I agreed that the paramedics could probably easily break the windshield to free them, and there was no sign of fuel, so it was fine for her to stay there until they arrived. Once I double-checked that she was secure and wasn't going to go anywhere, I handed off the phone to my partner while I went out to wave in the paramedics, who accidentally passed the site and were backing towards us from farther up the highway, looking for our flashlights, thanks to the dispatcher. They pulled off a ways up from the site and I began to brief them when we all heard dispatch come over the radio. Please be advised that the male passenger is AMS and considered dangerous. AMS stands for altered mental status, suggesting that someone isn't in a normal frame of mind for any variety of reasons. We all stopped in our tracks. The paramedics exchanged a glance, and one went back to the ambulance for additional equipment. I was eager to get back to my partner to make sure he hadn't communicated that to dispatch out of concern for his safety. But when we arrived on the site, they were still talking quietly. I went to my car to find shoes for the woman. The passengers were placed in different ambulances, and the police arrived to take interviews all around. Just as we were about to leave, an officer taking our statements turned to us and said, "It's real messed up. I guess she was driving and he wanted to kill them both. So he grabbed the wheel and overpowered her. It's lucky either of them are alive." After a couple of hours, when we were driving back, my partner proceeded to fill in the details. When he first got to the scene, the woman was yelling that he tried to kill her and not to leave her alone with him. She also said that if he got out, he needed to be restrained as he was a danger to himself and others. The man was very eager to be out of the vehicle. Bewildered, my partner had nonetheless helped the guy pry open the door, and once he was out, the guy just climbed up and wouldn't do much more than nod or shake his head in response to questions. He kept thinking that guy might take off and get lost in the desert. But in the end, he had waited. He said the guide seemed agitated, so he was doing his best to keep him engaged and distracted until help could arrive. It was chilling to realize that what we thought was an accident was actually a murder-suicide attempt. I really wanted to accompany the woman to the hospital, but for unrelated reasons, we couldn't remain. We went back that way during the day on our return trip a week later. We pulled over at the site and climbed over the dunes to see whether they managed to tow the van over all that sand. And sure enough, it was gone. What was unnerving was the realization that if he had chosen any other spot to grab the wheel, for miles in both directions, they would have been over a cliff almost immediately. In the dark, there was no way for him to tell. But he had chosen the only spot where they realistically could have survived the accident. My partner then told me that they had nearly gone off the road when they were nearly opposite our little sedan on the highway. If the guide opted for a head-on collision instead of the off-the-cliff option, we would have been toast. It was a sobering thought. I think of the woman I met that night often, and of her wolfhound being gingerly coaxed into the back of the police car. I really hope that they are in a much better place now. As for that guy who tried to kill them all, I certainly hope he gets help. Back in 2001, my friend and I went up to our aunt's cabin for the weekend in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi. On the way back home, we fucked up and tempted fate by talking about who of our friends we would call if something happened, like a car breaking down or something. Sure enough, doing 60, her engine just dies, and we maneuver to the side of the road and try not to freak out. Nervously laughing, we pull out our phones to make calls, but no dice. 0 bars. Now we're freaking out. There's been nothing inside for miles, but we do see a light from a trailer off the road up ahead. And we hash out whether to go ask for help or what to do. Finally, we decide we have to go knock and ask to use their phone to call for help. We walk up the long gravel drive, and as we're climbing the steps, my friend tells me not to worry, and shows me the butt of a pistol she had tucked in the back of her pants. At that point, I feel like my knees are knocking loud enough to rattle the windows and announce our presence. but I raise my hand and knock on the door. An old, bearded white guy in a tattered white tank top answers and looks us up and down. In response to our request for use of his phone, he slowly draws out, "We don't have phones around here." As we're looking from him to each other and back, trying to process a reality where there are no places without phone lines in the new millennium in America, we hear the crunch of footsteps on the gravel drive behind us and turn. Up walks a young couple to ask if they could use a phone because their car is broken down and they don't have any bars on their cell phones. At this point, I'm sincerely freaking out because I've seen The Hills Have Eyes, and I'm quite convinced that all sorts of terrible things are going to happen to us this night, probably the most pleasant of which will be death. I was calculating the odds of backwoods Mississippi guy having an actual EMP cannon. This had to be some kind of trap, or maybe one of those hidden camera gotcha kind of shows that was so popular in the 90s. Like the one Shannon Doherty hosted when they scared the shit out of people for laughs. He offers to drive us all to the nearest payphone, and my friend and I quietly discuss our options. Somehow, she convinces me that we should go, and that she'll protect us all if he tries anything. We agree to take the ride and thank him, following him around the side of the trailer to his windowless white van. I balked hard at this point, but ultimately, we all loaded up and I prepared myself for the worst, while silently praying as the four of us climbed in the back. I was simultaneously making peace with my life and centering myself for a potential fight to the death. Obviously, we made it. He drove us about 20 miles to a phone, and we called the cavalry without further incident. He chuckled a bunch about how weird it was that two couples' cars had broken down right outside his place. To this day, that is the creepiest and most incredulously weird night of my life. About 5 years ago, I was taking a solo motorcycle trip from Utah to Wisconsin and back. 2 days riding there, 2 days back, with about a week between. When I left, on my very first day, my plan was to get somewhere in Nebraska, grab a hotel room, and continue on the next day. I didn't make any hotel reservations or anything, more of a, I'll figure it out when I'm tired kind of deal. First mistake right there. By the time I was actually tired, every highway-adjacent hotel I could find was booked full. I guess this was because of Sturgis had just ended, and people were heading home. This is what one of the desk managers at one hotel claimed, so who knows? To give you an idea, I was just barely over the Wyoming-Nebraska border when I got tired. I had waited out a storm in Wyoming for a few hours. Going on about 1:30 a.m., I'm still riding through Nebraska, just taking every exit with a hotel to find an open one and stopping at a bunch of gas stations to stay awake. It was really only me and semi-trucks on the road. I leave a fairly large truck stop at the same time as a car that I wasn't really paying attention to. We both got on the highway, the car behind me. I get to cruising speed, right around 7 over the speed limit, and this car just stays behind me. Cut to about 20 miles later. This car is still behind me, but uncomfortably close. Had I needed to hit the brakes for anything major, deer running across the road for example, he'd hit me for sure. So I let off the gas, figuring he'll just go around me and go on his way. No dice. I slowed all the way down to about 60 miles per hour and just held it there for a while. The car stayed right behind me. At this point, I really wasn't sure what to do about it, so I just sped back up to the highway speed and kept going. It was at this time I figured he might just be a cop. Being as nervous as I was, I really wanted to find out. I decided I could afford a speeding ticket, so I got up to 12 to 15 over the limit for a few miles. Still nothing. Just a car staying right behind me, maybe 50 feet back, on a more or less deserted highway. We still were passing the occasional truck. Sometime later, I'm down to about a half a tank now, and almost 3 a.m. I decide that at the next gas station, I'll take a long break. I see a sign for gas and take the exit. Guys, this gas station, no joke, has 2 pumps and 1 overhead light, like straight out of a horror movie. The car followed me to the gas station. I noped out of there back to the highway, less than a quarter of a mile. That car followed me the whole time, into the parking lot, and then right back out. The next gas station wasn't too far away, maybe 10 to 15 miles, big truck stop type of deal. The car follows me off the exit and goes around the other side of the main building somewhere. I stop there anyway, go into the little diner, and sit in a spot on the other side of the window as my bike, grab a little food, call ahead to the next few hotels available, and luckily, one had a room. I reserved it, went back out to the bike, and went on toward the highway. No car in sight. I got to the hotel around 4 with no other problems, and finally got some sleep. I still have absolutely no idea who was in that car, or what they were doing, but it sure had freaked me out. A story on here reminded me of the time some friends and I stayed in what had to be the 3rd most shady hotel in Vegas, when I managed to inadvertently traumatize the entirety of my company as I recounted what I considered to be an amusing childhood story. The hotel itself was a bit of a nightmare, as everything was bolted down and none of the doors locked. But I digress. The story itself is about my family's run-in with Satanists on a trip to upstate New York, though the growing expressions of disbelief and horror on my companions' faces assured me that the story was not, as I had previously considered, funny per se. In any case, what follows is completely true, and everyone present swears by this narrative. When I was 5 years of age, we took a road trip up to upstate New York to see my grandmother on my father's side, as well as to tour around the countryside a bit. There we were in rural upstate, away from the region in which my grandmother actually lives, and we were planning on staying in a bed and breakfast my father had booked ahead of time. It had been an unexpectedly long drive due to weather complications, and when we found the B&B in question, we were all quite tired. We went up to the door to check in. A woman, missing 2 of her front teeth on both jaws, answered. She invited us in, but warned us that they didn't have any room for the night. They were booked solid. My father protested that he had made arrangements in advance, but she said she knew another hotel that had vacancy just up the way, and she would give them a call, and she assured him they would offer the same rates. But first, she insisted on showing my parents around, as her husband was an artist, and she wanted to show them his studio and famous artwork. We were all invited in, but after seeing the first few pieces of naked women missing their front teeth, bound or being ritual tortured in various ways, my parents opted to leave the kids outside with Grandma. Apparently, most of the rooms were full to the ceiling, with similarly foreboding images of dead or dying people, with the occasional sculpture of menacing animals. My parents were a bit creeped out, but just figured these people were eccentric, and that they had dodged a bullet by ending up somewhere else. We all waited out back while the woman called her friend. Beside a pit containing what could have been nothing other than an altar covered with pentagrams. My mother mentioned that it seemed strange that not only had they not met the husband, having toured the entire house, but that there hadn't been a single sign of life or a piece of luggage suggesting that anyone else was actually staying in any of the guest bedrooms in this supposedly fully booked B&B. A side note that's probably not worth mentioning, but what I found strange when my mother brought it up, while telling me the story later, was that we stopped by a park to stretch our legs at some point before proceeding to the next place. The storm was closing in on us, and my parents wanted to be sure we had zero energy upon arrival. While in this park, my mother claims that one of us had found and brought to her a small necklace with a pendant on it. The pendant itself was a pentagram on one side, with an old-fashioned symbol on the other. My mother took it away and put it in her purse. We arrived at the next bed and breakfast to be greeted by a different woman, also conspicuously missing her 2 front teeth, upper and lower. It was about this time that my grandmother mentioned that she had read a lot of articles recently about tourists being killed by some cults of Satanists or some such in this area. Great. She tended to tell a lot of tall tales, so I think my parents kind of rolled their eyes and dismissed it. But they made a point to mention it later. The storm was now upon us. We were all exhausted, and there was nowhere else to stay that we could find anywhere near there. My dad decided that we would make do with whatever they had to offer. What they had to offer was a slightly renovated barn. During the bustle of our moving luggage in, the woman kept inviting my brother, who was 3, and myself into the house, saying she had some sweets and wouldn't we like to meet her kitties. She made it clear, however, that my parents were not welcome into that house because it was too messy and she would be embarrassed. We were herded away into the barn and told not to talk to the woman. Once inside, my father went about checking the beds and securing the one-room barn unit. The windows had no coverings whatsoever, and the doors had no locks. We placed pillows from the couches in the window frames, and my dad grabbed a dresser against one wall to block the door. When he went to move the dresser, he discovered it was on wheels, which were completely silent. He also noticed that the wall behind it moved a little when he shifted the dresser. When he scrutinized the wall, he found a seam. He pushed on the wall and it gave way. 2 invisible doors opening outwards into the night, and just outside was a dark-colored van, which had been backed up to the opening. Livid, my dad went about rearranging all the furniture in the room, stacking the heaviest against the outward swinging doors, and moving the mobile dresser with various loud objects behind it against the main door. When he had completed this, and we were all starting to settle down, at about 11 p.m., the woman brought us fresh-baked blueberry muffins. Now, as I mentioned before, I don't remember much of this trip, but this is one element I have a vivid recollection of. With the inclement weather and the rush to find a place to stay, complemented by the lack of restaurants in the area, we hadn't had what one might consider a proper meal. When you're 5, dinner is very important. The muffins were fresh baked and smelled heavenly. I wanted one more than I wanted anything else in the world. However, presuming that they were poisoned or something was seriously wrong about them, since this entire thing was beginning to feel like a horror movie, my mother absolutely forbid us from even going near them. She put them on a high shelf and sent us to bed. I was so angry. I went to bed hungry and irritable. Only 2 things happened that night that I can recall. My parents slept very lightly, if at all, as you can imagine. They claim they kept hearing talking outside. My sister woke us all up with a blood-curdling scream around 1 a.m. for reasons unknown, as she was usually a very quiet baby. When my parents got up and milled about for an hour, trying to get her back to bed, my mom noticed something on the wall as she kept walking her around and called my father over. What I would later learn was that the picture hanging to one side of the door that during the daylight seemed to be logs in a recently extinguished fire pit, and a tranquil forest scene was by night unmistakably burning corpses with a hooded smoky figure looming over them. We got up the next morning, packed up early, and waited for the lady to get up so we could pay and leave. While my parents were packing the bags, the woman came around back and gave both my brother and I small wooden cats carved into the form of napkin holders, each a different color, that she had written small notes on. As my father was paying after loading us into the car, my mom began kicking the gravel around on the drive absent-mindedly. The woman came over to say goodbye and waved to us with a gaped grin, and my mother noticed that she was trying to discreetly recover the tiles that my mother began to uncover under the gravel. Before driving off, my mother got back out of the car and uncovered one of the tiles, and she claims it was the same pentagram with a fascist symbol within it, that she had seen a similar version of it in the park, prompting her to notice as we drove away that necklace was no longer in her purse. The likelihood of it simply falling out of the purse pocket she had placed it in was, as she put it, quite unlikely. People listening to the story seem appalled at the fact that I still have the wooden cat that the nice lady gave me, sitting in my bedroom. I know this all sounds very strange, but I can only assure you that it matches well with my memory of the events, and all the adults who were there tell me the same story, and two of them are not known to extrapolate at all. Personally, I'm glad it's just a weird story we look back on with confusion, and that nothing stranger happened that night. So me, my boyfriend, his best friend and his girlfriend drove up to Big Bear on June 26th. Then a day later, another friend of ours drove up, and he was supposed to sleep downstairs and couples sleep upstairs, since there's only 2 bedrooms. The first night we stayed there, it was kinda creepy, because the cabin was pretty remote, and of course there's absolutely no lights outside. It is the woods with coyotes howling and bears. But, nonetheless, completely normal activity. On the 27th, around 12 a.m., my boyfriend and I are in bed, when suddenly, our friend, sleeping downstairs, comes banging on the door, freaking out, saying he saw shadows in the woods, and that the motion light came on, and there was thumping outside. We got a little freaked, but my boyfriend gets out of bed and checks the entire cabin, and even goes outside. Nothing. We go up to the other couple's room, where there's a porch with a sliding glass door that looks out to the woods. My boyfriend goes over to check the last place in the cabin, so he pulls the curtain and jumps and yells, "Oh my God." At this point, I'm terrified. My boyfriend is a 180-pound CrossFit coach, and to see a big guy like that scared is nauseating. He locked the door and backed away slowly. He quietly says, "There's a large man standing outside staring at us." He's just standing in the woods looking at us. At this point, I'm thinking he's messing with me. He looks at me and says, "Go lock the door." That's when I knew he was serious. Everyone is freaking out. I run and lock the door behind us, and we all decide to stay in the room to keep an eye out. It's the middle of summer and it's really hot, but we refuse to open a window. I'm so scared, but trying not to show it, as everyone else seemed to have calmed down. About 30 minutes go by, nothing happens. I get annoyed with the heat, and the fact that there's 5 people in a tiny room, and 3 of them are men. So my boyfriend and I go back to our room. I'm still pretty spooked, so my boyfriend tries to cheer me up. At this point, it's about 1:30 a.m. I told him I was too scared to sleep with the lights off. He tells me that's totally fine, and he understands. so we just lay with the lights completely on. Finally, I start drifting to sleep when I hear a thud. I sit up and look at my boyfriend. He looks at me. Then, the power cuts. I immediately start sobbing. I'm trembling and I can't see anything because it's pitch black. I try to get out of bed and run, but my legs get tangled in the sheets and I fall. My boyfriend picks me up and we grab our phone, and then we run to the other room where everyone else is staying. I'm hysterical at this point. I try to contact our host, but nothing will go through. I try to call my dad, but all of our phones say no service. We are alone out there. Thank God the friend who drove up after us had a different carrier because his phone had one bar. So he calls the local sheriff and they transfer us to the utilities company. We give the address and they tell us we're too far out in the woods and they don't cover that area. At this point, we are wondering if the entire area has no power or if the man outside had just cut our power. I cry more and we call 911 to report suspicious activity and a power outage. They send the fire department. A few hours go by and it's 3 a.m. and suddenly the power comes back on. We fall asleep and the next day we talk to some of the locals of the area. We told them our power went out and they said that was strange and shouldn't have happened. They told us the only reason that happened out here is because of a snowstorm. He said he couldn't explain it. So, to the man in the woods who might have cut our power, let's not meet again. I was 11 when this happened. Amy, my older sister, was 14, and Becky, my younger sister, was 8. My dad was a freelance programmer when I was younger. He made great money on his jobs, but because he was so heavily in debt, and my mom was not the most gifted person on balancing a budget, we never had much free money available. This meant that we were on a vacation once every few years, and usually that was to a relative's house. My dad had just finished a long project for a big client, and we were celebrating the occasion with a new movie, Final Destination, because my dad loved watching scary stuff and scaring the daylights out of my sisters and me. We were in the middle of the movie when the phone rang. He went to get it and came back to grab Mom, while we kept watching the movie. Becky took the opportunity to pause the film and take Duchess, our dog, captive because she was scared. They came back about 10 minutes later and announced that we were going to be spending the weekend in the cabin. We didn't know what to make of that, but apparently the client he'd been helping owned a nice cabin by a lake in the mountains and offered to let us lodge there this weekend for a considerably reduced price. It was Thursday, so Mom went into a panic frenzy of packing, so we didn't see the rest of the movie that night. After school the next day, we packed up the family van and headed to the mountains. It was a 2.5-hour drive, so it was late by the time we got there. We unloaded the van and went exploring in the cabin. It was a ranch-style cabin with a small nook thing you could climb up to that was about head height. It was about 3 feet tall and probably meant for storage, but it was an excellent place for the 3 of us to hang in and play games. There were a few dozen board games up there, so we started playing once we decided on the rooms. Mom and Dad got the largest one. Amy claimed the smaller one with the twin bed, so Becky and I got the last room, which had a queen-size bed we could share. We had a window on the right side of the bed without a curtain, and a lamp on the left side of the bed. It was the only light source in the room, and there was a closet opposite the bed. It was locked and we couldn't get in it. We went to bed at around 11. Becky is a kicker, so I slept by the lamp in case she ended up knocking it over. I remember lying down and I must have instantly fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, Becky was gripping my arm and trying to burrow under me. She was squeaking something in fright, and I couldn't understand what was happening. I sat up, looked towards her, and saw something pale and human-shaped moving away from the window. My sleepy brain took several moments to process that, and then I was shooting out of bed and dragging Becky with me. We rushed to our parents' room, who told us we were imagining things. Mom told us to go back to bed, and if we saw anything else, to let them know. I, much to my current annoyance, agreed with them, and went back in the room with Becky. We switched positions because she refused to go back to bed by the window. I told her a story to get her to go to sleep, and promptly conked out after her. I didn't wake until the morning. The next day, we went exploring around the lake for about a half an hour, before Dad decided we'd spend the day in town. They had lots of small shops, and my parents went into every one of them. We ate lunch and dinner in town, and finally went back to the cabin. Amy made a joke about something as we neared the cabin, and I remember everybody laughing before my dad suddenly held up his hand to make everyone stop. He took another step towards the cabin and pushed the door open with a single finger. I thought it was strange that the door wasn't latched, but I didn't put the obvious together right away. "Dad?" Amy shuffled nearer to Becky and me, but Dad gave his head a shake to let her know she needed to be quiet. He went into the cabin and disappeared inside for a minute or two, while we stood on the porch. Mom called out his name, and he called back that we could come inside. We did, and found him standing in the middle of the living room with a frown. He locked the door once we were inside and took Mom to the bedroom for a quick chat. Amy, having caught on to what was happening, opted to distract Becky and me by suggesting another round of the board game we'd been playing the night before. We hadn't been playing for more than 5 minutes when my mom and dad came back. Mom went about cleaning the dishes from breakfast, while Dad joined our game. We played for a few hours before Dad told us we needed to go to bed. It was only 9 at that point, which made Amy mad. She was allowed to stay up until 10:30 on school nights, and later on the weeknights. Becky and I went on to bed while they argued. We climbed back into the same spots we slept in, Becky by the window and me by the lamp. I read to Becky for a bit before we drifted off. I woke to Dad rushing into our room. He scooped Becky out of the bed and grabbed my hand. He dragged me out of the room and into the hall, where I saw Amy getting similar treatment by my mom. I became aware of a high-pitched whine in the living room and saw our dog sitting at attention by the back door. She was bristled and seemed anxious. Dad didn't put Becky down and didn't let go of my hand. They rushed out of the house and into the van. Dad went back to get our dog, and then he burned rubber getting out of the cabin. He drove all the way back home without talking once. It took a half hour for Duchess to calm down. He told Amy what happened the next day, but Becky and I didn't find out until years later. He'd woken up that night to what sounded like moaning outside the window in his room. He jumped up and looked to see what was going on, and had found the front door unlocked. Stuff in the kitchen had been moved, and Duchess started to growl at the back door, which was ajar. He locked us and got us out of the house. He went back the next day to get our luggage and found several pairs of footprints outside mine and Becky's window. I was briefly affiliated with a sorority in college. I ended up dropping out in my junior year, and originally only joined to hang out with one group of guys in this frat that I really liked. During my birthday weekend of my sophomore year, the frat threw their annual time machine party at this mountain resort in West Virginia. I'm not going to disclose the name of the resort, but it's located about an hour outside of Charleston, West Virginia. We'd all driven down to West Virginia from our university. Because it was mid-November, the leaves were changing to all sorts of beautiful reds and browns and golds. Also, because it was mid-November, the only people staying at the resort were our party, and one family of 8, who was staying right by the river and entrance to the resort, down at the base of the mountain. Our party had all the cabins closest to the top of the mountain, a 30 to 40 minute hike from where the other group was staying. Our cabin setup went something like this. The biggest cabin was at the very top of the mountain. This was where all the frat seniors and council members slept. The cabin was used as the main party house for the weekend. To get to the cabin, there was one narrow pathway. It curved down along the side of the mountain, kind of encircling the peak, so as to make the walk less steep. The mountain cabin was the only one at the peak. The next nearest set of cabins were 2 full revolutions around the mountain away. Then another set, 2 more loops down, and so on. So all this to say, there were groups of lit cabins separated from one another by several minutes of pure West Virginian darkness. 3 of the girls in my sorority and I had attended the trip and were bunking together in a cabin about 8 revolutions down from the main cabin. It was a 20-minute or so walk up the mountain's path to reach it. On the second night of the trip, my birthday, we set out around 10 p.m. to rejoin the group at the main cabin. It's worth noting that none of us had been drinking at this point. Emily, May, Jen, and myself were walking up the mountain. We've just passed the group of cabins 2 turns above our own, so we're almost halfway to the main house. We're all just laughing and talking about the boys in the frat, normal girl things, you know. We're in one of the gaps where there are several minutes of walking in almost total darkness. We have 3 flashlights between the 4 of us, which we're using to watch for divots in the road. We turn around the side of the cliff, and the tree line above us opens up such that a bit of moonlight illuminates our path. And that's when we see it. Walking at a remarkably slow pace, about 20 to 25 feet ahead of us, we can see the outline of a very tall person. Specifically, we can see what appears to be a white t-shirt. The white fabric of the shirt is vividly reflecting, almost glowing in the moonlight. We all see it at the exact same time and have identical trains of thought. It's someone from our group of 90 people who decided to walk to the main party house alone. Never mind that, we've been walking up the same narrow path as they had for almost 10 minutes and hadn't noticed them ahead of us. Emily yells out, "Hey, do you want to walk with us?" Jen says, "It's so dark. Don't you have a flashlight with you?" The tall figure stops in the road, still probably 20 feet ahead of us. We all kind of stop too. Everything in the forest around us seemed to go silent. Extremely slowly, the figure turns to look back at us. This is kind of hard to describe, but all we could see was their white t-shirt. Everything else was so dark, we couldn't make out their limbs or features or pants or anything else at all, besides this glowing white shirt. But we could tell when this figure stopped walking, because we could see the absence of motion. When they'd been walking, we could just see the dark being manipulated by the presence as it moved through it. And now, standing still in the road, we could see the motion where, if we had been able to see the being's face, it would have turned and looked at us. It looked at us for a moment, and everything was still. I got this kind of nervous pit in my stomach, like something was warning me to proceed with caution. Then the figure took off racing, far faster than we'd seen it move this far. For whatever reason, all 4 of us took off running after it. We were yelling things like, "Hey, stop, wait," while we followed the glowing white figure around the next turn of the mountain, gaining on it. About halfway up this next turn, the figure suddenly veered sharply to the right and disappeared. We reached the place where the figure disappeared about 10 seconds after it did and shone our flashlights around, looking for them. To the left side of the pathway was a drop of about 40 feet. There was no way a person could have made it down there in the darkness without climbing gear or a flashlight, and we'd seen the figure veer right, so. To the right side of the pathway was a jagged rock rising completely vertically. No cave entrances, no path that a person could access. We all kind of looked at each other and then took off again, sprinting the rest of the way to the main cabin. When we arrived, we were all gasping for air from running up a mountain. Some of the frat guys met us at the door and were laughing at how disheveled we looked. We were all speaking over each other, clamoring to share what we had just seen. One of the frat guys turns over his shoulder and yells, "Hey, Claire." A girl who I've seen around the campus and recognize as a senior from a different sorority comes over to us. The frat guy says, "Tell these girls what you guys were accusing us of." Claire looks at him for a second and then turns to us. "Last night around 3 a.m., someone was tapping on our windows. At first we thought it was an animal, but it kept tapping in patterns, so we thought it was some of the boys messing with us," she went on. "We filled up some water balloons in the sink and snuck out the back window to go surprise them. But when we got outside, the guys weren't there. There was this, I don't know, it looked like a person, but I couldn't see the person. I could just see." And then we all said in unison, "Their glowing white shirt." She looked surprised. Yeah, we still thought it was someone with our camp, but when we tried to follow it, it just, I don't know, it seemed to disappear into solid rock. No one else saw the being for the rest of the trip, but it's something we all remember vividly and swear happened. I've heard that West Virginia is haunted by spirits from the Civil War, but I'm not sure that what we observed was a ghost. So about 3 years ago, I went camping with my girlfriend, now ex, as she had always expressed interest but never had been. The spot we went to is a Huron National Forest and is my go-to camp spot, as it's hidden deep in the forest and the access to the trails is close and easy. My family has been going to this spot for about 6 years, and my friends that introduced me about 10 years or so. We went for a weekend trip, and I'm glad we didn't go any longer. When we got there, everything was going well, except we did notice a group of people that were hanging out next to our campsite, but they were just stargazing and ended up leaving. Then around midnight is when the weird stuff started to happen. At first, it sounded like someone was laughing at us, but the laugh never ended and got very high-pitched. After a while, we both got kind of scared and went into the tent to try to sleep. And that's when the laughing noise moved up higher and then started to circle the campsite. After a while of that happening, it just suddenly stopped and then started again around 3 a.m. When it started again, the fire was going out, so I went to stoke the fire with my shotgun in hand and turn on my flashlight to see if maybe I could see coyotes or something around the campsite. But I didn't see anything or hear any movements below. This went on until 6 a.m. and then stopped, and then finally we were able to get some rest. After we woke up, we checked around the campsite and didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so we packed up. Once we were packed up and good to go, I start my vehicle and it's completely dead. That really freaked me out, as I'm always paranoid about leaving things plugged in that kill the battery, and made sure everything was closed properly and unplugged, yet somehow the battery still died. I was able to get a jump from AAA. After that happened, I told my friend, who had shown me the campsite and also has a cabin in the same forest, about what happened, and he got freaked out. He told me about the 2 incidents which he has had, one at the campsite and one at his cabin. At the campsite, he stated that one night, after we had all returned from the trail riding and went to bed, he stayed up to hang out by the fire and have a few drinks. While he was hanging out, he was just looking off into the distance and saw a pair of eyes up in the trees looking directly at him. And he flashed his high-powered flashlight at them, but there was nothing there, and as soon as the flashlight turned off, they were looking right back at him. So he packed up and went right to bed. He didn't tell us because he didn't want to scare us. At the cabin, he was hanging out with his brother, and they were both just chilling by the fire outside when they both saw a pair of eyes looking at them from the trail that leads into the woods. They stated that at the height the eyes were looking at them, whatever it was had to be over 7 foot tall. They started shooting at it with their rifles, and the eyes disappeared, but once they were done, they reappeared and were closer. At that point, they both freaked out and got back in the cabin. They did not leave until daylight. We have no idea what this could have been, but all felt very scared when these events were happening. After we talked about it, one of the brothers thinks it was a Wendigo. I don't really know what it could be, but I haven't felt that scared since. So all these things happened over the span of 3 years that I lived there in the beginning of 2012. A childhood friend from years back asked me if I would be her roommate. I needed out of my parents' home and she needed a roommate. Seemed like a good situation. Now for the house. Nestled in a suburban area was this cabin. The cabin dates back to sometime in the 1700s. The road the cabin is off of bears the same name as the original family of the house. They owned a large portion of the land that is now one of the largest cities in the US. If you search American colonial cabin, you'll see a swathe of images that look like it. We found out it was used as a stable house. The stable house theory checks out, as our dog took up a horseshoe once. I still have the horseshoe. The night we moved in, I knew the place was eerie. No doors up to the stairs, which was my room. No doors to the downstairs bedroom. Her bedroom was an addition that someone added in the 80s. The previous owners also added a much-needed kitchen and bathroom, as the original layout didn't have either. Now that you've got a decent imagery of what I was working with, I'll start with why I'm saying this. So when moving in, I immediately felt a feeling of being watched. The house always felt dark, cold, much like a cellar. Par for the course with that type of house, but there was something else. It started with scratching. Every night I would be in bed, I would wake up to this scratching directly underneath my bed by my head. At first, I thought it was mice, but when I listened to it long enough, I realized that the scratching was a long draw, like a foot-long pull, then repeated. I just covered my head, muffled my ears, and closed my eyes. Being a 23-year-old man, I felt like I was cowering, but I was not able to tussle with wood-scratching spirits. Normally, I would have been asleep by this time, but I was up late and heard it. It started on the ceiling on the far side of my room, then it went down the wall. Then it scratched its way directly underneath me. After a while, the scratching went across the room and back to the wall. Then gone. Here's why it's not mice. My walls were solid wood, as the inside logs were the same as the outside. The floor had no space between the ceiling below and the floor above. Like I said, old cabin. I got scared and started sleeping downstairs. Roommate, now wife, asks what's up, and I told her. She said the same stuff was going on when she's home alone. This isn't the first week. Here's the creepy part. So when we moved in, I had to unscrew all the screws that the previous renter had put in the windows. I had to unscrew one of the exterior doors that he screwed shut. We had to clear out what we think was weird rabbit food from the oven. We had to write, "Doesn't live here," on hundreds of mail order catalogs that the previous renter received. We both started sleeping downstairs in the living room and felt comfortable in numbers. The eerie feeling was easier to deal with if someone was with you. Until one night, I had a dream that a dark force was approaching me. It was in third person, as if I was watching myself sleep. The entity starts looming over my head, and all the while I feel a pressure building up in my head and a high-pitched ringing in my ears. It got so intense that I sprung up from my sleep and looked around my room. About a second later, the TV shut off. Just cut off. We had been having problems with the TV, randomly turning on and off, but this time was far too coincidental to be brushed off like everything else. Also, I knew I went to bed with the TV turned off. I cut it off. Why was it on in the first place? We started sleeping in a room after that night. She told me nothing really happens in her room. Maybe because it was an addition. I don't know. Well, our ghost played matchmaker, and now we're trying for a kid, married for 5 years. Anywho, once, I was upstairs reading, and as I was falling asleep, my window started opening and shutting. I was already at my wit's end with this spirit, so the next day I set up the same situation. Same thing. Funny, it never does that when I'm not in there. I ended up yelling, telling it to leave us alone, and I was tired of its shit. It kind of worked for a while. Then, when I was home alone, alarm clocks started going off as soon as my wife would leave. Drawers would open, banging on the front door. Then over time, it just stopped, slowed down, ultimately to nothing. I guess as I matured there, it stopped messing with me. Today, my in-laws live there, and the home is cute, homey, and warm. I spend time there alone and don't feel any malice. Our third roommate wasn't your typical, I'll get him at night kind of entity. It didn't matter what time of day it was and who you were. When my windows were opening and shutting the first time, it was night. But the second time it happened, it was in the middle of the day. The first ever experience we had was pounding on the door at night. But later, when my alarm clock was going off, it was 9 a.m. on a Saturday. If me and my friends were hanging out in the kitchen for a beer, the entity would show itself. Drawers containing silverware and knives would just start randomly opening. Trash can top would start rocking 2 p.m. in the afternoon. I'm not sure why the entity just went away, but it did. In some ways, I don't think that the house was haunted at all. Sometimes, I think we had a strong enough negative energy to bring something in. We drank a lot. Pills weren't hard to come by. Neither had any idea of where to move forward in life. It was almost as if your inner voice of hate manifested into a physical form. As we got healthy, got direction, moved forward, the entity slowed and subsided. The cabin is still in my family. My mother-in-law refuses to let it go. I went from being a 20-something brat to cleaning the gutters and scheduling specialty repairs for the old house. I love that cabin and where it's put me. When my father-in-law passed away, I spent a few hours alone in that cabin, hoping for a familiar knock, but I got nothing. When I go there now, there is no sense of doom, only warm welcoming, safety, and comfort. It was as if the entity wasn't trying to haunt us forever, only be a spiritual nanny, so to speak. And when my wife and I matured, it parted ways. But my story isn't over yet. My mother-in-law has vowed never to let the cabin go. It's willed to my wife and her siblings. The ghost always messed with me more than my wife. I guess I had an open port that I could slip into easier. But we both experienced things. I've always been more attuned to the paranormal than her. My mother swears she's seen a ghost. You know, physical embodiment of a person type of ghost. My mother's side has always been sensitive. It's not like we ever talked about it, but over the years, stories came up. Mostly good stories. I guess I came from a batch of sensitive folk. Don't get me started on the glass breaking. I haven't figured that one out.